Ling Han and his group began searching in the mountains. As for the tribe of dwarves, Ling Han had already advised them to be careful. With the help of the staff weapons, they should not encounter too much trouble. The three of them listened to the description of the Garuru tribe. The mountain treasure was buried underground, and some were even as deep as tens of meters deep. Aside from hunting, the daily lives of these dwarves also included excavating mountain treasures, though their gains were very, very limited. Furthermore, these dwarves were really too sincere and honest. Whenever they dug out a mountain treasure, they would anxiously rush to offer it as a sacrifice, and had no concept of savings. In general, mountain treasures were very easily recognizable. They would by themselves emit light that was milky white in color, and there seemed to be some kind of transparent liquid flowing in them as well. Previously, there had been an outrageously bold member of the Garuru tribe who had opened the mountain treasure and drunk this liquid, and he had died directly. From then onwards, no other member of the Garuru tribe dared to joke around with the mountain treasure, and they thought that this was a punishment from the gods. With the ability of Ling Han and his group, they could very easily topple mountains and overturn seas, but this mountain was different. It was too firm. Ling Han attempted to blast open the mountain rocks, yet that did not have any good result at all. Thus, he could only slowly dig like any other ordinary person. The inefficiency of this was astonishing. It could be claimed that it was completely up to luck. There was nothing to be done. The three of them tried their best, searching around for the mountain treasure. Bewitching Maiden Row had even said in a moment of anger that if she was the one to discover the mountain treasure, she would definitely not bring Ling Han with her into the mountain cave. Ling Han's only response was, "Heh. Small Tower, can you guess what that mountain treasure is?" Ling Han asked. Since he had something that could help him cheat, why should he not use it? Small Tower pondered for a while and then said, "That could possibly be the cave spirit treasure jade. Something formed from a sliver of the essence of the heavenly Tao source rock being nurtured. That is why it can help to open up the cave that contains the heavenly Tao jade." "Are you sure that that mountain cave contains the heavenly Tao jade?" 99% sure. Small Tower nodded. Since the heavenly Tao jade is formed, only a celestial king technique can resist it. What you have to be careful of are that brat and girl from those two celestial king tier forces. The others could not possibly retrieve it. "Can you find the mountain treasure?" Ling Han asked again. "If I'm close enough, I can sense it," Small Tower said. "How close?" "Maybe within 3 meters. The scope was really too small. However, compared with having to overturn the entire mountain, the advantage of having to dig 3 meters deep was overwhelming. Ling Han nodded and used his movement technique, beginning to circle around in the mountains. If the mountain treasure was within the scope of less than 3 meters under the surface, then Small Tower would be able to sense it. Compared to digging, circling around the mountain was innumerable times easier. Unfortunately, after he had done a full circle, Small Tower did not have any reaction. Ling Han was exasperated and could only play the role of miner, beginning to clear the area. It seemed to be all rocks here, and there was a pitifully small amount of sand. Furthermore, the rocks were extraordinarily hard, and he had to refine them with the power of regulation, so the slowness of his progress could be imagined. Thankfully, Ling Han and his group had borrowed the staff weapons, which could save them a considerable amount of energy. But even so, it was still exceedingly slow, and with such work, more than 5 months had passed. The 3 young king tiers had eventually laid down their pride, and earnestly did the heavy manual labor. "Brat, head left," Small Tower suddenly said. Ling Han faltered for a moment, and then showed an expression of delighted surprise. "You found something?" Small Tower was impatient and demanded, "I told you to head left, so just do it. Why do you have so much nonsense to spout? Would it die if it was not Sundra?" Ling Han still began digging leftwards, but he had just begun when Small Tower said, "You've gone too far. Head right a bit." After a few attempts, Small Tower finally stopped making any noise and allowed Ling Han to advance forwards. Now slower. After advancing slightly more than 1.5 meters, Small Tower spoke up again. Ling Han slowed his movements as asked. The staff weapon could possibly damage the cave spirit treasure jade. So he decisively gave up the staff weapon, and only used his bare hands, beginning to dig at the rocks. His hands were wrapped in regulations and were like iron spades. Though they were not as indestructible as the staff weapon, the advantage was that he had full control over the power. If a jade suddenly emerged from a rock, he would not damage it. In only a while, Ling Han saw something bright. He had discovered a beautiful jade. It was indeed as what the dwarves had said. This rock was completely milky white and seemed slightly transparent. One could vaguely see liquid flowing inside it, as if it had a life of its own. "This is indeed a cave spirit treasure jade," Small Tower said. "Is this a treasure?" Ling Han asked. "Of course, it is formed from having absorbed a sliver of the source power of Earth, and even an ascending origin tier would be tempted by it." Ling Han suddenly understood. That dwarf had died after he had consumed the marrow fluid, not because the treasure fluid was poisonous, but because its medicinal effects were too strong, and he had directly died from being overnourished. Those dwarves were only in the shattering void tier. Though they had an unclear relationship with the heavenly Tao Jade, they could not possibly ignore the restrictions of their cultivation level entirely. After all, this was being consumed into the body, and having the light of death land on your body was completely incomparable. Too bad, this thing had to be used to open the caves. Otherwise, he could save it for his own use. As the saying went, one could not get a greater profit without making some sacrifices. Using this to trade for the heavenly Tao Jade, and advancing into the fifth severance. This significance surpassed all else. Ling Han carefully dug out this cave spirit treasure jade, and it felt warm in his hand, and there was even a slight wriggly feeling. "Put down the mountain treasure," an icy voice rang out. Though it was very melodious, it was filled with killing intent. A person was standing behind Ling Han, and even with how sensitive Ling Han's divine sense was, he actually did not discover how she had approached him. The strength of her abilities and excellence of her techniques were truly shocking. Zai Bingyun, the heir of a celestial king tier clan. It was no wonder she had such techniques. Ling Han slowly turned around and faced Zai Bingyun directly. She had a staff in her hand, and the staff's tip was aimed at him. It was the weapon of the Garuru tribe. Clearly, she had also found out how this powerful weapon could be used. A sliver of a cold smirk turned up the corners of her lips, as if she was mocking him. Being threatened by such a powerful weapon, Ling Han could only submit. Why did she not make a move? That was because she worried that she would destroy the mountain treasure along with him. Thus, she would wait until Ling Han handed over the mountain treasure, and then deal him a fatal blow. Ling Han frowned slightly, and his killing intent seeped out. "You've committed murder," he said. "I sense a powerful air of blood. And further, it's not just one." He suddenly became very furious. "You massacred that village of dwarves. This demented woman." Zai Bingyun's expression was filled with disdain. What was the big deal about having massacred a village of dwarves? They were only shattering void tier natives, and weren't even qualified to be noted in her memory. She raised a brow and said, "Stop blabbering, and hand over the mountain treasure quickly." This man was too despicable. He actually caused her to expose her hip in public. Not only he would have to die, every single person who had witnessed it would have to die. Ling Han gripped his hand into a fist, and coldly said, "Then trade your life for it. Die." Zai Bingyun slanted the staff weapon slightly. Shoo! A beam of light shot out, shooting towards Ling Han's right leg. This was a warning. The speed of the light of death was too quick. To say nothing of a severing mundane tier, it was probable that even dividing soul tier might not be able to evade this strike. Thus, this beam of light naturally landed on Ling Han's leg directly. Ling Han stood proudly like a boulder. This? Zai Bingyun's face was instantly filled with shock. Her small mouth involuntarily widening into an O. This was something that she could not understand, could not believe, and could not accept. How could this be? Ling Han humphed and he charged over. "Demented woman. I will use your head to offer apologies to the Garuru tribe. You overestimate your own capabilities," Zai Bingyun declared in disdain. She had already regained her senses from her previous astonishment. She was, after all, a king among kings. He actually dared demand that she be buried next to them? She was the heir of a celestial king-tier clan, a future empress of the skies. So how noble and dignified was she? So what if you managed to block the staff weapon? Can you match me in battle prowess? Zai Bingyun fought fiercely with Ling Han. She had full confidence in herself. She had only used the staff weapon as a threat so she could save herself some effort. After all, Ling Han's physique was too tough, and she was well aware of that fact. "Which celestial king-tier force are you a descendant of?" she asked. If that was not the case, without having the brand of a celestial king into his body, how could he possibly be able to resist the regulations of the great Tao that were formed from the source power of Earth? And this was why the staff weapon was so frightening. It was equivalent to a celestial king using techniques. Without a height of regulations that was its equal in level, there was no way to resist it at all. Humph! If it's not a celestial king-tier force, you can freely slaughter whoever you please? Ling Han also used the staff weapon, and as the light of death flashed, Zai Bingyun similarly could not dodge, and was blasted head-on. However, Zai Bingyun looked like she was completely fine. As she attacked madly, she asked in disdain, "Do you think that you are the only one that has been bestowed supreme regulations by a celestial king?" Realization dawned on Ling Han. It was no wonder she guessed that he was the descendant of a celestial king-tier force. Since the staff weapon was ineffective, Ling Han decisively put it away and brandished his fists, using 9 Heavens Flame and Xianxia Source Water, and beginning an exchange of blows with Zai Bingyun. However, while the staff weapon could allow a group of shattering Void-tier natives to insta-kill a third Severance King-tier, the same trick clearly could not be used on those like Luo Changfeng and Zai Bingyun. Going by the look of things, it was still the source power of heaven and earth that was more powerful. When he thought about it, it was true. Just how many source powers of heaven and earth were there, and just how many celestial kings were there in comparison? Or in other words, if a celestial king wanted to grant this kind of destructive power to others, he himself would have to pay an extremely great price. To grant a descendant the ability to insta-kill just a severing mundane tier or dividing soul tier, the celestial king would have to make this kind of sacrifice. Which celestial king would be that foolish? Ling Han and Zai Bingyun exchanged blows. In terms of battle prowess, he clearly was at a disadvantage, but with the might of the 2 great source powers, he was not much too inferior. Zai Bingyun smirked coldly. Even if he had been bestowed supreme regulations by a celestial king, how could he be able to use them without limits? Just look at her. By now, she had only used this kind of regulations to protect herself, but did not use them in attack. That was because this was something that could be expended fully. And it was not that she did not hate Ling Han, but rather that she wanted to use these precious regulations when she fought for the heavenly Tao Jade. Otherwise, without the celestial king-tier regulations protecting herself, there would be no way that she could take hold of such a treasure. With Ling Han being so extravagant with his use of them now, as soon as he had expended his power of regulation completely, what else could he match her with? And on what basis would he take possession of the heavenly Tao Jade? Idiot, what celestial king-tier force had produced such an idiot? But when she thought about it, this brat seemed to be extremely treacherous. He was clearly a descendant of a celestial king-tier force, yet actually went to become a subordinate at a 3-star force, and she had almost been deceived. "You despicable villain," Zai Bingyun rebuked. How was this guy a worthy descendant of a celestial king? He actually gave out half-truths. Ling Han did not dispute her words. What good was it to bicker with a dead person? Since his killing intent was already spiked, then who cared if she was a man or woman? No matter how beautiful she looked, it could not possibly cause him to feel the slightest bit of mercy. Die! The 2 of them fought intensely, and the more Zai Bingyun fought, the more shocked she was. Logically speaking, with the rate that Ling Han was expending them at, the celestial king-tier regulations should have already been expended fully. No matter what, there was no way he could continue to use them like they were completely unlimited. This was an impossible thing. It should be known that though the power of Celestial King was endless, they were only in the severing mundane tier, after all, so there was a limit to the regulations they could sustain. If too many regulations of the Great Tao were sealed in them, it would create a very great burden on them, and they could even explode and die from it. She had used her own situation to make an estimate. Ling Han's expense of regulations had definitely reached the volume that was sealed into her body. Then why could he still use them after that? Could it be that, because his physique was stronger, he had more regulations sealed into his body? Was this possible? That was Celestial King tier regulations, so what use would a stronger physique be? In the face of Celestial King tier regulations, did 1 mark and 100 marks have any difference? They would both be overwhelmed. This battle continued progressing, and Zai Bingyun's shock gradually increased further. That was because Ling Han was too extravagant with his use of Celestial King tier regulations, just like a super spendthrift. She could not understand, and could only feel shocked. What was even more unacceptable to her was that her Celestial King tier regulations were also heavily expended, and she had already used half of them. If the battle continued, it was possible that she would not have enough to retrieve the heavenly Tao Jade. Just you wait. She tossed out these words and left in a leap. She could not continue to waste Celestial King tier regulations here. Ling Han did not set out in pursuit. Even if he managed to catch up to her, it would be no use. He similarly could do nothing against Zai Bingyun. He definitely had to break through to the third severance. Ling Han mentally vowed. He had had that idea in the first place, and now when he thought about the fact that the village of dwarves had possibly been slaughtered by Zai Bingyun, the killing intent in his heart was boundless. He, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro rushed back to the village of dwarves, but discovered that this place was already scattered all over with corpses, and they could not find even a single survivor. This demented woman! Ling Han's eyes swept over the scene, his whole body trembling slightly. Though he had not spent much time with the dwarves, he admired the sincerity and hospitality of the dwarves very much. He would definitely not have imagined that when he came back, he would actually witness such a scene. Zai Bingyun, if I don't kill you, my heart will be unable to rest easy. Ling Han stared at the distant skies, practically spitting out each word. It was just at this moment that the earth suddenly cracked apart, and a rabbit suddenly shot out. However, it had the head of a wolf. It opened its mouth wide, and like a bottomless hole, it was about the size of 21 to 24 meters as it aimed a bite at Ling Han. It was that mutated celestial medicine. This fellow really appeared and disappeared unpredictably, and was skilled at stealth, deceiving the divine sense of Ling Han and his group altogether. Furthermore, it was also quite intelligent. The time at which it unleashed its attack just happened to be a time when Ling Han was feeling incredibly furious, a strong ripple appearing in his divine sense. Then the attack arrived. Though Ling Han had been surprised, he broke into a sliver of a smile instead. He was only afraid that this celestial medicine would never appear again. If that happened, he would not be able to take it, but the moment it appeared, he would at least have some hope. This celestial medicine had also devoured a bit of the behind of the 7 lives divine clouds, so no matter what, he had to seek an accounting for this debt. Pa, the celestial medicine swallowed, and Ling Han instantly disappeared from sight. The rabbit's head immediately returned to its original size. The wolf's head was salivating. It wanted to refine Ling Han, and then extract the 7 lives divine clouds. This celestial medicine's intelligence was really not low. It knew how to make use of its advantages. It was practically undetectable underground, and took advantage of the opening when Ling Han's emotions were the most turbulent to suddenly attack. Could be claimed that its timing was extremely spot on. And true enough, it had swallowed Ling Han in a single gulp. It was confident in its extraordinariness. Swallow was the second ability that it had developed, and allowed it to refine everything. Now that he had entered into its mouth, it meant that everything was over. It lazily cradled a carrot, and carelessly chewed on it, and did not even look at the Empress and bewitching Maiden Ro directly. Bewitching Maiden Ro was astonished. What kind of thing was this rabbit? Its plump white body was very cute, but it actually had a hideous wolf's head, and had actually swallowed Ling Han in a single mouthful. That tiny body was actually capable of accommodating Ling Han's size? After being stunned for a moment, she immediately charged to attack the rabbit, and demanded, Hand him over! Ling Han had saved her life, and this was a great favor. The Empress was also in a thunderous fury. She was not worried that Ling Han was in life-threatening danger, but this celestial medicine actually dared to swallow her husband. This was really too outrageously bold. She immediately formed her 9 doppelgangers, and they attacked the celestial medicine madly. The rabbit broke into a run. It still had the regulations of lightning, so its speed was extremely fast. Even if the Empress used lightning flash, she could only stare in stupefaction from behind. However, it only ran a short way, and then its paws suddenly paused. The wolf's head opened up, showing an expression of pain. A bump suddenly appeared on its stomach, as if someone had punched it from the inside. Furthermore, this shape was clearly the shape of a fist, and the hit was so hard that the rabbit hopped a little forwards. The Empress and bewitching Maiden Row caught up with it, and a round of mad blows instantly rained down on it. Merely in terms of battle prowess, celestial medicines were actually very weak. They only possessed some strange mystical powers, such as hiding underground or running very fast. But this celestial medicine was an exception. It had mutated and possessed the ability of swallowing. But this did not mean that its battle prowess was strong. Aside from biting, it really couldn't do much of anything else. Aching from being pummeled by the Empress and bewitching Maiden Row, it suddenly exploded in fury, and opened its wolf's head wide again, biting at the 2 women. However, its mouth had just opened when a gigantic fist waved out of its mouth. Then, the fist turned around and landed heavily on its face. Pung! The rabbit was immediately sent flying from the harsh impact. Pung, 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 pung. Without waiting for it to land on the ground, innumerable fists appeared on its body, and they had all been shot out from its inside. In fact, there was even sword chi dancing, causing great damage to it. The worst thing that it could have done was swallow Ling Han. He was a man that had 2 source powers, as well as a top-tier precious treasure like the Black Tower. Was he anyone that it could swallow? It could only suffer the consequences of its own actions. Pong! The rabbit's chest was torn open forcefully from the blows, and a figure shot out. It was Ling Han. The moment he appeared, he stretched out a hand to snatch the carrot that the rabbit had in its paws. That was the main body of the celestial medicine, and this wolf-headed rabbit was only formed from its leaves and stalks at most. The rabbit struggled with all its might, yet could not struggle free no matter how hard it tried. It frantically twisted its wolf's head in its panic, wanting to bite Ling Han. Humph! Ling Han used source power, and under the suppression from the 2 great Celestial King tier-level powers of regulation, that celestial medicine immediately became obedient. Kill it! 7 lives divine clouds jumped out. Its behind had almost been devoured by this celestial medicine, and now that they had captured the culprit, it naturally had to come out and watch it get its punishment to vent out its fury. No, no, no. It's not enough to just kill it. Bite its bottom. Bite it to death. The celestial medicine was stomping around in fury. It had never experienced such great suffering before this. The celestial medicine with a rabbit's body was extremely violent. Though it had been suppressed, it was still determinately opening its mouth. Furthermore, its eyes were set on the 7 lives divine clouds. If it were not for this celestial medicine, it would not have taken the risk. In its consciousness, swallowing other celestial medicines could stimulate its evolution. Longing was powerful. This was written in the blood of every single living creature. Ling Han looked towards the Empress and said, "I want to enter into seclusion and attempt the 3rd severance." The Empress nodded and said, "All right." She knew that Ling Han was seriously angry now and vowed to kill Zai Bingyun. She naturally was fully supportive of this action. With a flash, Ling Han had entered into the Black Tower. Underneath the Reincarnation tree, he began to refine the celestial medicine with a rabbit's body. This celestial medicine had mutated, and it could not be treated like a pure celestial medicine, but had rather stepped on the path of cultivation. However, its path of cultivation was unlike that of human cultivators. Instead, its growth was dependent on swallowing its own kind. It did not cultivate origin power, and merely depended on regulations. Thus, it could not possibly supply any accumulation of origin power, but only provide the comprehension of regulations, and this was also what Ling Han presently needed the most. The celestial medicine with a rabbit's body struggled. From a certain aspect, it was a cultivator, so it was naturally unwilling to be refined by others. But who asked it to have been greedy? It actually took the initiative to make a move on Ling Han, and the result was that it had delivered itself up to its death. With its violent nature, Ling Han would not have the slightest bit of mercy. It was unlike the 7 lives divine clouds, which he would rather not consume, and would rear it inside the Black Tower so that he could harvest a little bit of celestial fluid every millennium. This was also the way of doing things of most factions. That was because it was too time-consuming to nurture a celestial medicine right from the very beginning. Though consuming a little bit of herbal essence was inferior to directly consuming the entire celestial medicine in effect, the advantage was that a thin stream would flow forever. All the forces with vision would do this. Under Ling Han's refining, the celestial medicine with a rabbit's body finally showed its true appearance. That was a ginseng, but the body of the ginseng was covered with frightening symbols, causing wariness to sprout in the heart of anyone who set eyes upon it. This was a mutated, or rather a demonized celestial medicine. Ling Han did not consume it. Instead, he directly extracted the essence from within. Multiple regulations surged out, interweaving and creating a resonance with him. He was more focused on cultivating the regulations of fire and water. If the celestial medicine was of either of these two elements, Ling Han would definitely benefit more, and it would be faster when he refined it because he had the source power as foundation. But now, though it was not ideal enough, celestial medicine was connected with the heaven and earth, so even if the regulations did not match, that was fine. It could still open the doors of heavenly Tao for him so that he could communicate with the Tao of heaven and earth. This was the advantage of celestial medicines. Around Ling Han, multiple regulations solidified, turning into strange symbols, and forming a nest that sealed Ling Han within its many layers. Very soon, he could no longer be seen, and as time passed, this nest also became solid, turning into a massive egg of light, with light of great Tao rippling around it. 3 days later, multiple fine cracks appeared on the egg of light and became increasingly closer and closer to each other. They covered the whole egg, and then with a it shattered, and Ling Han was seen standing proudly there. However, his present situation was a little... how should it be described? Not only had all his clothes disappeared, even his hair, eyebrows, and so on had disappeared without a trace, and his whole body was sticky. His clothes and hair had melted when he had been resisting the celestial medicine's swallowing regulations. However, his physique was really too tough, so even the swallowing regulations could do nothing to him. Beneath Celestial King tier, the regulations outside the 5 elements were all too strong. Ling Han wiped himself carelessly, and the sticky fluid on his body was instantly rinsed off by clean water. He drew out some clothes, which he put on, but his hair and brows were not something that could be regrown in a short while. That was because this was no ordinary injury, but damage caused by regulations. He was confident that he could deliver the 3rd severance now. Killing Zai Bingyun had become Ling Han's inner demon and obsession. He exited the Black Tower and released the restrictions on his cultivation level. Instantly, tribulation clouds dulled out in the skies. This was a Celestial King tier level mystery realm, but it was still unable to hide from destiny, which was proof of how high the tier of heavenly Tao was, as it was superior to even Celestial King tier. Is there any existence that can escape from the Tao of heaven and earth, and not belong to one of the 5 elements, an existence that is truly noble and able to look down on all else? Ling Han suddenly thought in his heart. Stop this kind of thinking. It is too dangerous, Small Tower suddenly warned. And Ling Han only grunted and did not ask. Heavenly Tao is cruel and will erase any existence that wishes to escape from its control. Though Heavenly Tao can only take action under certain conditions and cannot unleash a divine retribution that far exceeds your cultivation level to erase you, it can make you extremely unlucky, and you will never encounter any treasures again in future. Furthermore, you will also repeatedly experience bad luck, Small Tower explained. It calmly said, putting all else aside, it only has to make it so that you will meet a celestial king, and let this celestial king know that you possess two source powers. I am sure that the majority of celestial kings would make a move on you. Would you be capable of escaping? Ling Han was speechless. He had no fear of heavenly tribulation, as it could not exceed his own cultivation level too far, but if he had been set up to meet a celestial king at this time, then even the Black Tower could not save him. As the saying went, the will of heaven was mysterious and inexorable. For the present, at least, he was still not qualified to challenge the mysterious heavenly Tao. He had best just obediently undergo the heavenly tribulation. Fighting with the heavens required him to possess strong abilities. Whatever the case, he would have to be a celestial king at least, and only then would he be able to sustain the various problems that heavenly Tao could create for him. Quang, the heavenly tribulation had formed. Suddenly, a long bolt of lightning struck down, bringing with it the might of regulations, wanting to kill an ant that dared to steal the power of the heaven and earth. Ling Han faced it plainly. After entering into the celestial realm, the heavenly tribulation had actually become considerably gentler towards him. Strictly in terms of power, the heavenly tribulation of third severance was definitely innumerable times stronger than the heavenly tribulation of the Genesis tier, but the crux of the matter was that Ling Han's strength was also growing by leaps and bounds. With such a comparison, he was actually having an easier and easier time. That was because in the celestial realm, there was definitely not only one freak like him, so heavenly Tao did not have to be concerned about him so much. Of course, even king tiers would have to be wary of this kind of heavenly tribulation, but for king among kings, it was nothing special. In fact, Ling Han even took the initiative to shatter his own body, so it could be tempered under the might of the heavenly tribulation. Strike! Ling Han's eyes shone brightly, turning into two divine pillars that shot towards the dome of heaven, as if even the mystery realm could no longer block them. Meanwhile, he used his hand like he would use a saber, and delivered a strike at the skies, striking the heaven and earth. Wang, this strike clearly had not struck anything, but a loud bang exploded in the heaven and earth, deafening and ear-splitting. This was the sound of great Tao. Suddenly, lightning blazed madly, and the might of the heavenly tribulation soared greatly. This strike of Ling Han was struck at the heaven and earth, causing his connection with the heaven and earth to become even weaker. This naturally had drawn the displeasure of the heaven and earth, and this was just the third severance at that. The fourth severance would definitely incite an even stronger backlash from the heaven and earth. If he could not survive it, that would directly mean his death. Ling Han nodded internally. It was no wonder that there were so few emperor tiers. Sometimes, even if you had freakish natural talent, and met the standards in terms of comprehension ability, would you be able to survive the backlash from the heaven and earth? Each of these four strikes was harder to deliver than the last, and the backlash was also stronger with every subsequent strike. The first time, Ling Han could practically ignore it, and he could feel it during the second time, and for this third time he would have to take it seriously. Then what about the fourth time? Moreover, he was aiming for the fifth severance, so that would be even more frightening. He made his calculations on this basis, and felt that it would be very, very difficult for him to survive the backlash from the heaven and earth after the fifth strike. Even if he cultivated the indestructible heaven scroll, it would not be of much help to him. Even if he went through rising from the ashes, he would only continue to be insta-killed after his rebirth. Then wouldn't the fifth severance be the strike that killed him? There is always a way out, Small Tower spoke up. In a Celestial King tier sect, the Celestial King would prepare a natural peach seal for those disciples with heaven-defying natural talent. This could shelter them from destiny, and decrease the might of divine retribution by one severance. A thought suddenly flashed through Ling Han's mind. After using the natural peach seal, the fifth severance would actually be crossed like it was only the fourth severance. Then he would have a chance. Furthermore, if he advanced normally, he would probably have one in millions and millions of a chance to succeed, but the Empress was definitely going to fail. Even the supreme divine fetus that had been formed through the 9 Deaths Heaven art could not possibly match the backlash of the heaven and earth during a fifth severance. Natural peach seal? What is that? Ling Han asked. One of the mother trees of the celestial realm, an existence that is on the same level as the reincarnation tree, Small Tower explained. However, The leaves of the natural peach tree cannot help one to comprehend Tao, and can only help to shelter one from destiny. This was already quite awesome, being capable of deceiving even destiny. Where should I get it from? The Rock Palace should have it. Rock Palace? As Ling Han resisted the heavenly tribulation, his thoughts continued to wander. The reason that he had come to the Fu clan was to find out the whereabouts of the Rock Palace, and now that he had found out that the Rock Palace was in the Western Celestial Realm, and advancing into the fifth severance required the natural peach seal, it looked like he had to head there as soon as possible. When he had advanced into the dividing soul tier, the natural peach seal naturally would have no more significance. All right, I'll head to the Western Celestial Realm after leaving the Mystery Realm. Ling Han shouted, and brandished his fists madly at the heavens. This damn heavenly Tao, why was it torturing him so? Half a day later, no matter how much the heaven and earth wanted to erase Ling Han, it could only withdraw the heavenly tribulation and disperse. Third severance. Ling Han sensed for a while, and a smile appeared at the corners of his lips. Present, he was indescribably strong. At least, when he next encountered Zai Bingyun, he had the confidence that he would be able to kill her within 1,000 moves. That was because he still had 2 source powers. So what if she was an emperor tier? Husband. Seeing that the heavenly tribulation had dispersed, the empress came over elegantly, an expression of pride on her face. She was proud of Ling Han. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ro was standing some distance away, so shocked that her mouth was gaping. She was aware that Ling Han had only been in the second severance middle stage previously. Though everyone had advanced to the level of peak stage in the Ascending Dragon Palace, the time required to stabilize from the second severance peak stage to the third severance was frighteningly long. She had experienced it before. Even if her sect had still used a rare treasure, which sped up her time by 1,000 times, saving 300,000 years' time for her, she had still used a total of 1,000,000 years' time altogether. They were in the Mystery Realm, so they couldn't use any precious tool to speed up their time, and he had taken just slightly more than half a year's time, which had been mostly spent on digging rocks at that. Even refining a celestial medicine would not have such extreme effects. This guy was really a freak. Freak. Ling Han smiled at the Empress and said, "Let's go to the mountain cave." He had the mountain treasure in possession, and Zai Bingyun wouldn't be able to find another mountain treasure in such a short period of time. Then, the most likely thing for her to do would be to lie in ambush in the vicinity of the mountain cave, make a move, and enter before he did when he opened up the mountain cave. If Zai Bingyun really planned to do this, then that would be where she would die. It was very rare for Ling Han to hate a person so much that he was determined to kill her. However, in Zai Bingyun's case, if he didn't kill her, his conscience would not be able to rest easy. The 3 of them headed towards the mid-mountain area, and the mountain cave soon appeared. It was very ordinary, and several rocks had sealed the entrance. It was as if just moving them out of the way would grant them entry. They naturally could not be moved at all. Ling Han had made the attempt, but every single rock was heavier than even a star, and was definitely nothing that he could move. He took out the mountain treasure and placed it on a rock like what the dwarves had said. Then he only had to wait quietly. Sometimes it would take half a day, and at others it would take 3 days, and then the mountain cave would open. "You can scram now." Right at this moment a figure appeared. Luo Changfeng. Actually, Luo Changfeng was quite depressed. He had at first thought that he would definitely come first this time round, and the only one that could rival him would be Zai Bingyun. But when he came out of the Ascending Dragon Palace, he realized that he kept falling behind. Ling Han was the one who had discovered the entrance to this place, and he had brought a huge group of people with him. At first, he thought he would be the first to find the heavenly Tao Jade once they had gone separate ways, but reality had proven that he hadn't even been anywhere close. If it were not for the fact that he had encountered Zai Bingyun, he still would not know that it was highly possible that the heavenly Tao Jade would be hidden inside this mountain cave, and the way to open it was through the mountain treasure. And now, even in the case of the mountain treasure, Ling Han was still the first to find it. It's fine, Luo Changfeng said to himself. Though he kept falling behind, as long as he could pull off a comeback at the last moments, and take possession of the heavenly Tao Jade, what harm would be done? It was not that he had not been suspicious of the fact that Zai Bingyun had purposely informed him of such precious intel. Perhaps this was only a lie, but Zai Bingyun had plucked out a sliver of her memories for his viewing. That was the information that she had obtained after plucking the souls of the tribe of dwarves. Thus, though Luo Changfeng was still slightly hesitant, he would still enshroud this mountain cave with his divine sense every day. He had not thought that Ling Han had really brought the mountain treasure with him just after a few days. Haha, the heavenly Dao Jade was his now. Facing Ling Han, he naturally was filled with superiority. Previously, Ling Han had obediently let him through, which meant that the latter feared his status as the holy son of a celestial king tier sect. Furthermore, he was an emperor tier-level prodigy. "Scram!" he demanded arrogantly. Ling Han slanted a sideways glance at him. Did this guy really think that he was all that awesome? He laughed and said, "Come, demonstrate to me how the action of scramming is done. If you perform well enough, I will reward you." Luo Changfeng was taken aback before coming to realization. "Fuck! You actually dare to mock me? You are very outrageously brazen." Luo Changfeng smirked coldly, but did not get angry. It was not worth his while. What kind of esteemed existence was he? If he were to squabble with a nameless character, that would really be attaching too much importance to Ling Han. If he didn't like him, he merely had to erase him directly. Thankfully that guy is not here, or you would have to be cautious about your behind by now. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh. The word dog could not be spoken spontaneously. What did that mean? Hiss, it can't be that you are coveting my behind? Pervert. Luo Changfeng's killing intent involuntarily blazed. This guy actually dared have ideas about him. He was really courting death. He humphed and said, "Since you are so determined to seek your own death, then I'll just show." He had not even finished his words when he saw that Ling Han had already charged over to him. He had shot out a palm strike which was descending straight down onto his head. Luo Changfeng was furious. "Just who do you think you are that you actually dare take the initiative to make a move on me? Die!" He extended his index and middle fingers and waved at Ling Han. An image of a star appeared at the tips of his fingers, exuding an astonishing aura. Pong! The two of them exchanged a blow, and both of them trembled before taking a few steps backwards. They had actually ended up in a tie. Luo Changfeng's whole expression immediately became incredibly colorful. He had indeed witnessed the strength of Ling Han's physique before, but it was only that. In terms of battle prowess, Ling Han was not just a little bit weaker than him, especially when he had now reached the third Severance Peak stage. He was now even more confident that he could suppress everything else. But Ling Han was actually capable of matching him. He could not believe it. What was even more frightening was the fact that the ripple of the other's aura was clearly only in the third Severance early stage. Third Severance early stage, and he was already capable of matching him? It should be known that he was a king among kings. To say nothing of being invincible among his peers, even with the gap of a cultivation level, he was still able to suppress king tiers. Previously, it was always he that would be fighting those in a higher cultivation level than himself, but now the tables were turned, and this was a massive blow to his confidence. On the sidelines, bewitching Maiden Ro had also gone numb with shock. In a battle of equals, it was still Luo Changfeng who was actually at an advantage in cultivation level, but the result of the clash was a tie. Then, if their cultivation level was completely equal, wouldn't it be Ling Han who would be slightly superior? This guy was too freakish. He was actually stronger than even the holy son of a celestial king tier-level sect. There was no fear of ignorance, only fear of comparison. Two great emperor tiers were existences that blinded the whole world with their brilliance. Individually, which of them was not incredibly outstanding? But when put together and compared, which was the better would be immediately clear. Monarch tier. Luo Changfeng's voice trembled slightly, but was filled even more with jealousy. King tiers could be invincible among their peers, and king among kings or emperor tiers could be invincible even with a gap of a minor level, and as for monarch tier, they would be invincible even with the gap of 2 minor levels. In truth, the number of king tiers was very limited. Ordinarily, only 3-star forces could nurture such prodigies. As for a sect, they would only have 4 or 5. At most, it would not exceed 10, and in terms of Emperor tier, that could only be found in Celestial King tier great forces. Occasionally, this kind of prodigy would appear in 4-star forces, but it was incredibly lucky for even one to appear. But as for Monarch tiers, that could only possibly appear in those top-tier Celestial King tier forces, such as 9th Heaven Celestial King tier level. Though there was a Celestial King in the ranks of the Thundercloud Palace, this Celestial King was only a 2nd Heaven Celestial King, and was who knew how far away from the 9th Heaven. There were 9 heavens in Celestial King tier, and every single step forwards was as difficult as ascending the heavens. But now it was possible that a young Monarch tier had appeared in front of him. Just who exactly are you? Luo Changfeng asked darkly. He was an Emperor tier after all, so though he was shocked, he did not panic. Ling Han smiled faintly and said, Ling Han, a mere commoner. There is no need for you to take me to heart. How could he not take it to heart? Luo Changfeng stared coldly at Ling Han. Was there really such a freakish person that could become a Monarch tier through his own talent and effort? That was not right. What was a Monarch tier? He would have to be a 5th severance, but Ling Han was clearly only in the 3rd severance, and could only be considered an Emperor tier. Since there were weaker and stronger King tiers, why wouldn't there be a difference of quality among Emperor tiers? Since you are just a commoner, then please die. Luo Changfeng's arms shook. Ka. Golden light suddenly rose up from his arms, which turned into multiple symbols that stuck tightly onto his arms, forming a pair of arm guards. He was just standing there proudly, but his whole figure was exuding a domineering aura that overwhelmed all else. Zai Bingyun had the supreme regulations bestowed by a Celestial King, and what he had was this pair of arm guards. This was something that the Celestial King of Thundercloud Palace had used before, and a sliver of his aura was left in them. Though it was just a sliver, it was enough to sweep aside all opposition in the severing mundane tier. Anything that involved a Celestial King was always that awesome. Luo Changfeng crooked his finger, his disdain seeping into his actions and words. Aren't you a commoner? Then I'll just treat you like a commoner. Ling Han chuckled derisively, and merely looked at Luo Changfeng's arm guards. This thing could be further refined by the divine demon sword, which was great. In front of a Celestial King, every other existence is an ant. Luo Changfeng said in an overbearing tone. So noisy. Take a punch from me. Ling Han charged out, 2 source powers entwined around his fists. This was enough to allow him to resist the aura of a Celestial King. You overestimate yourself. Luo Changfeng smirked coldly, and also shot out both fists. One after another, the symbols on the arm guards lit up. The power of Great Tao was boundless, and that was an aura that could suppress the severing mundane tier. Ling Han was the type to become stronger with a strong foe. His 2 source powers were limited by his own cultivation level, and he could not express their full might. But when they encountered the challenge from the aura of a Celestial King, their might naturally increased. Pong! The 2 of them exchanged a blow again. Their figures slid back respectively, and it ended in a tie once again. This time, Luo Changfeng's expression really changed drastically. In fact, even his skull was starting to go numb. He had already used the Celestial King tier technique, yet was still incapable of suppressing Ling Han. Gasp! It was either that this brat was the descendant of a Celestial King, or that he had obtained a supreme opportunity, and that was the only way he could match the Celestial King tier technique. His eyes immediately lit up. If it was the latter possibility and he obtained it, then perhaps he would have a chance of becoming a Celestial King himself. Just how many holy sons and holy daughters had come out of the Thundercloud Palace? Many, very many. As generations passed, after the old holy sons and holy daughters advanced to the ascending origin tier, they would no longer hold the position of a holy son or holy daughter. Instead, they would become elders. But throughout this epoch, no second Celestial King emerged from the Thundercloud Palace. Why? Celestial King tier was too hard to break through to. Even a Celestial King tier force would have extremely great difficulty to produce a true heir. However, celestial kings were the true immortals. They could even shatter the immortals' tribulation easily, and there was no fear that the entire force would suddenly crumble when the celestial king died one day. Luo Changfeng was confident that he could reach the ascending origin tier. As for becoming a celestial king, that was practically impossible for him. Thus, he needed the heavenly Tao Jade to deliver the fifth severance. If he succeeded in achieving the fifth severance, then becoming a celestial king was a sure bet. Furthermore, he would definitely not be limited to just the first heaven. However, aside from the heavenly Tao Jade, there were other treasures that could help one to advance to the celestial king tier in this world, such as the source powers of the heaven and earth. He examined Ling Han's hands closely, and his heart skipped a beat. He asked, "You have obtained the source power of heaven and earth?" Ling Han was slightly surprised. The other party was actually capable of recognizing the nine heavens flame and Xianxia source water. Seeing Ling Han's expression, Luo Changfeng instantly confirmed his guess internally. He had guessed correctly, and when Ling Han saw the dawning realization in his expression, he understood that the other had actually just been throwing out random guesses. However, he did not hide it. He opened up his right palm. Boom! A flame sword, and it was formed completely from symbols of great Tao. This is the nine heavens flame. Then he stretched out his left hand and similarly opened his palm. This time, though, a cold air rose. This is the Xianxia source water. Fuck! Luo Changfeng had practically never uttered any swear words in this lifetime. Yet now he had a strong urge to curse. Source powers of heaven and earth. Just what kind of rare and precious existence were they? Even the majority of celestial kings could not possibly possess them, yet a mere third severance cultivator had actually possessed these two source powers of heaven and earth. What justice was there left in this world? A smile slowly appeared on Luo Changfeng's lips. Then he laughed loudly. Ling Han, you are really my lucky star." Ling Han also smiled and said, "Are you about to say that I have come from so far away just to deliver two source powers of heaven and earth to you? How could that not be the case?" Luo Changfeng asked arrogantly. By now, he was sure that Ling Han was definitely not the descendant of a celestial king tier force. Otherwise, what celestial king would let their disciple possess two source powers of heaven and earth? Since that was the case, on what basis could Ling Han match a celestial king tier technique? Did he think that just because he had two source powers of heaven and earth, he could do whatever he liked without any scruples? Ling Han shook his head and said, "Your thoughts are too fantastical." "Oh, then what if you add me into the equation?" Zai Bingyun's voice rang out. Her figure appeared elegantly, her right hand holding a sword that was as bright as autumn waters. Luo Changfeng frowned slightly, but subsequently relaxed. By now, he had guessed that Zai Bingyun had told him about the mountain treasure because she was in fact targeting Ling Han. The reason was that she could make use of him to deal with Ling Han. But to be honest, though his words might seem very confident, he was similarly filled with wariness towards Ling Han. If he joined forces with Zai Bingyun, that would be combining two celestial king tier techniques, and that would definitely mean their victory was guaranteed. Ling Han's eyes passed over her, and his killing intent immediately blazed as he glared at Zai Bingyun. "I want the nine heavens flame," Luo Changfeng said. "Fine." Zai Bingyun nodded, and the two of them had instantly reached an agreement. One wanted the nine heavens flame, while the other wanted the Xianxia source water. Both of them knew that it was impossible for them to take sole possession of two source powers of heaven and earth with the other here, so they could only share the spoils. However, even a single source power of heaven and earth was already incredibly awesome. Even the majority of celestial kings could only feel envy. Obtaining a source power of heaven and earth meant they would definitely become a celestial king. Otherwise, that would definitely mean death. Ling Han smirked coldly. "Two corpses, and you are still daydreaming. Die!" Luo Changfeng and Zai Bingyun both launched an offensive against Ling Han at the same time. One charged from the right side while the other took the left side. Though they had never worked together before as Emperor Tiers, they could understand what the other wanted with a single look, and their cooperation was flawless. Ling Han would have to face two great emperor tiers at the same time. The empress did not move. Though she was an emperor tier, there was still a gap of a minor level, so she would not be of much help to Ling Han. She might as well just obediently watch from the sidelines to avoid causing trouble for Ling Han. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ro was restless. She could somehow match a third Severance Peak stage Emperor tier, but both Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng had Celestial King tier techniques. Against this kind of secret technique, she could only feel helpless resentment. Thus, seeing that the Empress did not move, she also sat and watched from the sidelines. Ling Han was fighting the descendants of two great Celestial King tier forces, but he was not the slightest bit afraid. The Nine Heavens Flame and Shenin Source Water were both entwined around his fists, and as he rained down a barrage of punches, he was not being reasonable at all. He was just using this kind of method to crush his opponents, who let this be his source powers, so there was no need for him to fear using them too much. But Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng could not do the same. One had the Celestial King tier regulations, while the other wore a precious armor. Both would come to a time when they were completely used up, so which of them dared take him on forcefully? In a clash between strong enemies, it would be the braver one that would win. Ling Han showed his full domineering demeanor, and Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng could only dodge his blows. They wanted to wait until Ling Han was exhausted, and then turn around to deliver a counterattack to kill the latter. But how could such plans possibly succeed? "We can't go on like this," Zai Bingyun communicated to Luo Changfeng through divine sense. Luo Changfeng understood it completely. At this moment, he did not dare to underestimate Ling Han in the slightest, yet coveted the Nine Heavens Flame and Shenin Source Water even more. A Celestial King tier technique might be strong, but that, after all, was not a power that belonged to him personally. There would ultimately come a time when it would be used up. However, if he could obtain and refine a source power of heaven and earth, then that would be a completely different story. This person in front of him was clear proof. With two great source powers of heaven and earth, not only was he capable of matching a Celestial King tier technique, he could be extravagant with his use of them because there was no need for him to worry that he would use them up, and there was no need to worry that he would be powerless later on. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he said, "This is the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm." Zai Bingyun was also a smart person, and immediately realized, as long as one has lost the Blood Dragon armor, then the fire element of heaven and earth is capable of eliminating even an Immortal Palace tier. For example, even though they had Celestial King tier techniques, they still had to wear the Blood Dragon armor before they dared to enter into this place. A Celestial King tier technique was supposed to be used on the Heavenly Dao Jade, and not the fire element in this place. Of course, it was not that Celestial Kings did not have a technique that could help them be immune to the fire element of heaven and earth, but if it was something that could be resolved with a Blood Dragon armor, what was the point of going the extra mile? The two Emperor tiers immediately found a strategy, and when they once again launched their attacks at Ling Han, they were aiming fatal strikes madly at the clothes he was wearing. Ling Han's expression involuntarily became strange. Those two should know that he was not wearing the Blood Dragon armor. If he said it out, he was really afraid that the two of them couldn't accept the fact. Pong! 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 But Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng did not take other things into consideration at all. They both thought that they had found the perfect method to deal with Ling Han, and inflicted damage at all costs, determined to make Ling Han naked. Ling Han was very speechless. The two great elites seemed utterly determined to tear his clothes apart so that he would be naked. Most importantly, this did not have the slightest significance. Yet Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng still looked like they would win as long as they had torn his clothes off him, which Ling Han did not know whether to laugh or cry at. And the problem was Ling Han did not have the slightest desire to be bare and naked, to say nothing of the fact that his wife and bewitching Maiden Ro were still here. Even if they weren't here, he had no interest to expose himself completely to the two of them. If they were so intent on tearing clothes, they should just tear off their own. Ling Han was furious. Come on then, wasn't it just tearing off clothes? Did they think he didn't know how to go about doing it? He also used his techniques, and made a move on Zai Bingyun's and Luo Changfeng's clothes. He would really like to see who would be bared first. The three king among kings fought fiercely. This scene was naturally incredibly grand. Yet bewitching Maiden Ro was watching in shock, wearing a very strange expression on her face. You guys, are you really Emperor Tears? There is no other Emperor Tear like you people. Making a move on each other's clothes, they were just like old housewives or hoodlums on the streets, tearing and pulling at each other. There was really no taste to it. Is it really all right for you to act like that? Now that the great battle to tear off clothes had been launched, even Ling Han was unable to escape. His physique was indeed very strong, and he was unafraid of the attacks from two great kings among kings, but his clothes weren't. In the face of having two great Emperor Tears so determined to attack, even if it meant that they would be injured, how could they not be damaged quickly? Even if the clothes that he was wearing were woven using top-grade saintly material, which had also been fused with the celestial wings of certain immortal beasts, how could they manage to hold up to the desperate attacks of Celestial King tier techniques of two-thirds Severance Emperor Tears? However, though the clothes on Ling Han had turned into pieces, Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng were not all that much better off, either. The clothes they were wearing were also ripped. They practically looked like beggars. This caused Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng to feel fear. That was because they knew that they were not able to resist the fire element of heaven and earth here, and once the blood dragon armor had been torn open, they would definitely be dead. But this also firmed their resolve. That was because since Ling Han had counterattacked so fiercely, it had to mean that he had been scared. Then let's just see who will be the first to fall. I'll rip. The two great Emperor Tears gritted their teeth and continued to rip like mad. You rip? Don't I know how to rip as well? Ling Han was enraged. He had no intention of exposing his behind in public. Boom! The nine heavens flame turned into swords under the flame control technique and slashed madly at the two great Emperor Tears. Even if Zai Bingyun's and Luo Changfeng's strength was extremely powerful, they would not be able to protect themselves entirely. This was a true Celestial King technique, and added with it being a source power of heaven and earth, it was exceedingly powerful. Use your ultimate technique, Zai Bingyun forced out through gritted teeth. If this continued, it was possible that they would be bared first instead of Ling Han. This naturally could not be allowed. Luo Changfeng gritted his teeth, and then suddenly delivered a palm strike onto his chest. Suddenly, blood spurted from his mouth. However, he stretched out a finger and drew a circle, and the blood floated as if it had turned into swimming fish. This blood flickered with light, then rapidly evaporated, and was absorbed by the arm guards. Then, the originally golden arm guards became even brighter. Multiple flashes of light spread out, turning into an incredibly complex symbol. Luo Changfeng's whole person had become considerably weaker. Limited by his cultivation level, these arm guards could release severing mundane tier-level battle prowess at most. But now he had sacrificed a mouthful of blood essence, yet had increased the might of the arm guards further to a new level. On the other side, Zai Bingyun's expression was also grim. Multiple symbols lit up on her body, and a half-transparent precious sword emerged from her chest. This was the might of her ethereal divine fetus. Under her stimulation, in which she spared no expense, a great amount of gray hair appeared at her hairline. Her life force had been greatly expended, but she had ultimately summoned the ethereal divine sword. What was a divine fetus? That was one that possessed some Celestial King tier technique, but because their cultivation level was not there yet, they would have to pay an extremely high price if they wanted to use this technique. But now, it was either you that would become naked or me, and the two great Emperor Tears naturally would not have the slightest bit of hesitation left. You had best be the one to become naked. Go! Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng simultaneously released their strongest attack, which blasted towards Ling Han. Pong! As the attacks surged past, the brilliant light instantly concealed Ling Han completely. After flashing blindingly for at least a breath's time, it finally dimmed. This could possibly be the most unusual battle in history. Three great Emperor Tears were giving their all just to make their opponent naked. If this was made public, it was possible that no one would believe it. The greater possibility would that everyone would be laughing their heads off. Ling Han appeared, exposing his fair, naked body, as well as blood stains. Thankfully, because of these blood stains, Ling Han managed to save his modesty. After all, that was the might released from a celestial king tier tool and a divine fetus, and even one with Ling Han's physique had still been wounded. Both Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng were dumbfounded. Of course, they were not stunned by the majestic size of a certain part of Ling Han's body, but rather that this guy had just suffered a slight injury, and then that was that. This was a fatal area. Where did you wear your blood dragon armor? The two of them searched earnestly, but they could not find the presence of the blood dragon armor at all. It could be worn inside one's clothes, but it was impossible that it was still invisible when one was completely bare. You are definitely not human. Meanwhile, bewitching Maiden Ro wanted very much to cover her face, though it was Ling Han's behind that was turned towards her. For elites like them, their divine sense could completely be used like eyes. Wherever their divine sense had swept, they naturally would be able to see very clearly. Though she was the holy daughter of the Purity sect, and her strength was in charm techniques, she had never had any intimate contact with any man before. What more, seeing a man completely bare and naked as the day he was born. Ling Han took out some clothes, but did not have the time to put them on. He directly tied them at his waist. It was enough for them to temporarily conceal him. He glared at Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng, and raged to the extreme. They actually dared to force him to run naked? Die! Ling Han pounced out, and launched an offensive against Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng. This time, Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng were really incapable of holding up to it. They had already used a powerful move, and now was precisely their weakest time. How could they hold up to this furious counterattack from Ling Han? Furthermore, Ling Han was similarly just targeting their clothes, and that was definitely even harder to defend than their bodies. Pieces of fabric flew everywhere, and Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng very soon followed in Ling Han's footsteps, becoming completely bare and naked. Luo Changfeng was still better off. After all, he was a man, yet Zai Bingyun felt like she was about to die of shame. Right in front of 4 people, and 2 of them were men at that. Multiple holes were torn in her clothes, and her body was completely exposed to the extreme. However, this was far from the only thing she had to worry about. She had worn the blood dragon armor inside her clothes. That was because she wanted to look beautiful, and wearing the blood dragon armor outside her clothes would affect aesthetic senses. But whether it was used as outer armor or inner armor, this armor was now covered with holes, and its protective effects had already vanished. She could clearly feel a murderous aura hovering around her, restless around where the holes were, but because the blood dragon armor still had some effect, she was able to withstand it for the moment, yet her time was definitely limited. Retreat! Without the slightest hesitation, Zai Bingyun immediately turned around to flee. If she had lost even her life, then what was the point of the heavenly Tao Jade? Even if she wanted revenge, she would still have to be alive to do that. She was very self-centered, completely unconcerned with Luo Changfeng's survival. She was very decisive and determined when she turned to flee, as if it had not been the 2 of them who had just fought together on the same side. Humph! How could Ling Han possibly allow her to do as she pleased? Even if he didn't kill Luo Changfeng this time round, he was determined to kill Zai Bingyun. Without ridding the world of this cruel and vicious demoness, his heart would never be at peace again. Luo Changfeng was undergoing a fierce conflict of thoughts. Should he run? If he wanted to flee, this was the best time. Even Zai Bingyun was already at the end of her line, but for the sake of survival, one was always capable of exploding with endless fighting spirit, so no matter what, she would still be able to hold on for a period of time, which was enough time for him to flee. But the moment he left, the heavenly Tao Jade would definitely fall into Ling Han's hands. However, it was only a mere instant, and he had made his decision. He turned around and fled. That was because he and Zai Bingyun had not been able to kill Ling Han even in their prime condition, so what would grant him the ability to do it now? More importantly, Ling Han was practically a monster. He was actually not affected in this mystery realm. Shua! A sword light slashed out, blocking his way. It was the Empress. Though bewitching Maiden Ro was willing to step out for Ling Han, she had done so more out of a kind of righteousness and to repay his favor. but to ask her to intersect and kill the holy son of a celestial king-tier sect? She wouldn't dare to. Once either Luo Changfeng or Zai Bingyun died here, it was still fine if the murderer was known, as the matter would be simply resolved by having them pay for it with their lives. But if there were no eyewitnesses, then it was not impossible that a celestial king-tier force would erase all those involved in the matter in their great fury. Moreover, if it was because she moved that had led to Luo Changfeng's death, even the purity sect would be destroyed. Trying to speak reason with a celestial king-tier force? How was it supposed to be done, and who would listen? Thus, she merely stood on the sidelines. Luo Changfeng's eyes swept over the Empress, and he said, "Come with me, and I can fight for you to become a holy daughter of our sect." Shua, the Empress, shot out another flash of sword chi. This was her answer. Luo Changfeng did not have the slightest bit of delusions left. He delivered a palm strike towards the Empress, and his figure rapidly moved. At this moment, escape was his priority. The Empress humphed and sent out all 9 doppelgangers. Then, she summoned 100 fiery battle beasts. She used the unique environment of this place to strengthen her own battle prowess so that she could stand against a 3rd Severance Peak Stage Emperor tier. This was just barely enough, but it was not a problem for her to temporarily fight Luo Changfeng. After all, he was presently in a weak condition. However, even so, with the added factor of the Celestial King tier tool, one punch from Luo Changfeng was enough to destroy a battle beast, showing his invincibility. Thankfully, the environment here was unique. Even if one battle beast was destroyed, it only meant that she had to reform it. There was enough fire element here, and added with the flame control technique, it meant that the Empress had an endless supply of power. The Empress's strategy was also incredibly clear, and that was detaining Luo Changfeng. When Ling Han finished on his side, he naturally would come and erase the latter from existence. Bewitching Maiden Rose's heart beat madly as she watched. An indescribable coldness rose up in her, but she also felt an excitement that could not be put into words. Killing the holy son and heiress of a celestial king tier force. Just how outrageously brazen was this? But just how fulfilling would that feel? Ling Han's eyes were set on Zai Bingyun. He had already drawn the divine demon sword, and had similarly formed 10 battle beasts. After advancing into the 3rd Severance, the strength of these battle beasts had also improved greatly. Each one was no weaker than Zai Bingyun, what more when there were 10 of them. Additionally, there was Ling Han as well as 2 great source powers of heaven and earth, and the divine demon sword, and with all these together, how could they be anything that Zai Bingyun, who was at the end of her line, could withstand? If you kill me, you will definitely be hunted down by the elites of our Zai clan. If you offend a celestial king tier force, even if you flee to the corners of the earth, there is no way for you to escape, Zai Bingyun threatened. Even in this kind of situation, she did not beg to be spared. Ling Han ignored her. He had already sworn that he would definitely eliminate this inhumane woman. Zai Bingyun tried her best. If it was anyone else, she might still be able to succeed. However, Ling Han's physique was extremely tough, so even if she put her life on the line, he was not afraid. No matter how vicious and fierce her blows were, they would only cause him superficial injuries at most. Her eyes involuntarily became fierce. If she really was to die here, she would definitely drag Ling Han down with her. Zai Bingyun's body trembled, and suddenly became transparent. That was because the blood dragon armor she was wearing had already been largely damaged. Thus, one could clearly see through to the organs under her skin through these holes. Then, her whole figure became transparent, as if she was about to disappear from the spot she was standing. Ling Han's sword slashed out, but she did not dodge or evade. Instead, she picked up speed and pounced towards Ling Han, her arms spread wide open. Pooh! The divine demon's sword penetrated her body, but a vicious expression appeared on Zai Bingyun's face. Her arms closed around and tightly wrapped around Ling Han. In the eyes of outsiders, the scene was very erotic. A man and woman were embracing each other in a very intimate manner, both disheveled. Whoever saw this would probably let their imagination roam. Wouldn't they? But in truth, there was not the slightest bit of romance between the two of them, only endless killing intent. Multiple symbols appeared on Zai Bingyun's delicate body. This was her true greatest move and was also the last greatest move. By exploding her divine fetus, she would die together with her enemy. Being tightly trapped in her arms, Ling Han couldn't even enter into the Black Tower, and could only take this blow head-on. Void Storm. Zai Bingyun spat out these words softly, and her whole person exploded with a boom, turning into a frightening storm of regulations. Ling Han bore the brunt of it, and instantly felt like his body was about to be torn apart. However, his physique was too tough. After advancing into the third severance, it had almost reached the level of 3-star pseudo-divine metal. With a cold humph, he channeled the indestructible Heaven's Scroll. With his direct channeling, his defenses were instantly increased to terrifying heights. He would probably be able to withstand the blow of a Yin Soul elite. Zai Bingyun was putting her life on the line again, but she was merely in the third severance peak stage. No matter how much of a king among kings she might not be able to break through the line of dividing soul tier, what more matching the battle prowess of a Yin Soul elite. Boom! The space storm raged madly, but Ling Han stood there like a mountain. Zai Bingyun's whole person was turning into regulations. After this full power attack, she too would die and become a part of the heaven and earth. An expression of disbelief appeared on her face. This attack was actually completely ineffective against Ling Han. She had already put her life on the line, so couldn't he at least sustain some severe injuries? But she couldn't do anything else anymore. Like a porcelain object, her delicate figure was breaking apart piece by piece, and her spirit was also shattering along with it, to disappear with the winds. Ling Han felt neither joy nor grief. Killing someone was never an action that could bring one joy, but if he did not kill Zai Bingyun, he would not be able to apologize to the innocent tribe of dwarves that had died. He looked towards Luo Changfeng. Since he had already killed, he did not mind killing a few more people. When Luo Changfeng felt Ling Han's eyes on him, he felt as if all his hair was raised on ends. With a battle cry, he tried to break out of the siege at all costs. He definitely could not allow Ling Han to catch up to him, or he would be following in Zai Bingyun's footsteps. As the holy son of a celestial king tier sect, he would definitely become an ascending origin tier in future. In fact, he even had a chance of becoming a celestial king, so how could he die here? Now that he was using all his might, the Empress was immediately no longer able to block him, and allowed Luo Changfeng to break out of the siege. However, he had also paid the price by being wounded by a considerable number of battle beasts. However, at this moment he no longer cared. Ling Han used Luo Changfeng, and set out to chase down Luo Changfeng. An expression of humiliation and fury appeared on Luo Changfeng's face. In his eyes, Ling Han was just a piece of trash, yet he was actually being hunted by this piece of trash now, which made him feel incredibly humiliated. He only had to leave this mystery realm. He swore in his heart. Ling Han had 2 source powers of heaven and earth. In fact, he could possibly obtain the heavenly Tao Jade as well. He would definitely not allow the latter to swagger out. He had to ask the elites of the sect to move out, suppress Ling Han, and snatch all his great opportunities away from him. Crackle, crackle. Lightning exploded from his entire body. The natural lightning physique showed its might, and his speed was as fast as light. Ling Han used lightning flash. His speed was similarly astonishing, and he pursued Luo Changfeng closely. Both of them moved as fast as lightning. With a crackle, blazing white lightning flashed, the sight astonishing. Banish! Ling Han stretched out his right hand and pressed it down on Luo Changfeng. Luo Changfeng suddenly felt a coldness that caused his hair to stand on end. He gritted his teeth, and the flash of lightning on his body actually quickly became slightly stronger than before, and he attained another burst of speed, increasing slightly in an inconceivable manner, and he was actually faster than the strike from Ling Han. Banish instantly hit empty air. Ling Han also appeared slightly surprised. This natural lightning physique was really quite amazing. Even with that, Luo Changfeng still managed to dodge? Before this, only that mutated celestial medicine had been able to do so, and that was because that thing had grown through absorbing lightning regulations. Let me give it a try too. As Ling Han pursued, The lightning regulations that he had obtained through absorbing the celestial medicine surged in his heart. Before this, he had only used celestial medicines to interweave and form a resonance with the heaven and earth, and rapidly comprehend Tao through that, allowing himself to push open the doors to the third severance. He had not managed to refine the two types of regulations that were contained in the celestial medicine itself. He still had some time to cram. That was because Ling Han had already refined these regulations. 3 days underneath the reincarnation tree meant 300 years of comprehending Tao, which was enough time to refine these regulations. However, while he had refined them, he had not put them to use yet, nor did he know how he should go about using them. As he experienced it, zzz, lightning flashed madly. Actually, Ling Han was the most familiar with lightning regulations. That was because long since he had been in the small world, he had frequently shattered his own form and spirit to be tempered by divine lightning, and observe heaven's might in the meantime, turning it into his own power. Afterwards, he had obtained the 9 heavens flame, and had further retrieved the Xianxia source water, so there were 2 source powers inside his body, which was equivalent to having 2 celestial kings constantly teaching him great Tao without reservations at all times. He naturally became more inclined towards these 2 aspects, but this did not mean that his comprehension in terms of lightning regulations was inferior. On the other hand, he had created a considerable number of mystical powers through lightning regulations. He couldn't have drunk so much heavenly tribulation fluid for nothing after all, right? Thus, when the lightning regulations of the celestial medicine surged through his mind, and after he analyzed them, they rapidly turned into his own understanding. It should be known that this celestial medicine was the most proficient in fleeing, and its speed was higher than even the large black dog's. However, the large black dog was still well-versed in instant teleportation, and only then did he manage to cut it off. The true extreme speed of lightning. Ling Han's eyes glowed, and then turned a blazing white in color. It was like even his eyeballs were formed from lightning. Successively, his whole body flashed madly with lightning, and his figure also began to speed up. Pa 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 pa. Wherever he passed, lightning would be left behind in the air, and crackled loudly. He had acquired a new lightning flash celestial technique. Then, Luo Chongfeng shockingly discovered that Ling Han was rapidly closing the distance between them. He was so astonished that he almost spat his tongue out of his mouth. It should be known that this was a mystical power that had been nurtured naturally by his natural lightning physique. Even he could not maintain this kind of extreme speed for a very long time. Could not be helped. His cultivation level was limited, and he could only unleash so much power. But this was already incredibly awesome, and he was sure that no one could match him in the severing mundane tier. But in Ling Han's case, this was no longer matching him but rather surpassing him. Could it be that this guy also possessed lightning element source power aside from the 2 source powers of fire and water? Could you be even more freakish? His scalp was numb, but Ling Han was getting closer and closer. He was just a small distance away from being in his scope of attack. Luo Chongfeng humphed and said, Ling Han, you have killed Zai Bingyun, and will definitely suffer being hunted down by a celestial king tier force. If you further offend our Thundercloud Palace, you will not have the slightest sliver of survival left. Ling Han laughed loudly. You speak as if your Thundercloud Palace would spare me if I did not hunt you down. I do not have a deadly enmity with you, Luo Chongfeng persuaded. Ling Han scoffed and said, Do you take me for an idiot? You have already found out that I possess 2 source powers, and would also obtain the heavenly Tao Jade later. With your greed, can you spare me? I can just guess that once I leave this mystery realm, you will definitely have the elites from the Thundercloud Palace come and deal with me. Luo Chongfeng's heart clenched. He had indeed been thinking that. How could that be? I swear on my reputation. However, he thought was one matter, but he would definitely not admit it. Ling Han shook his head. Luo Chongfeng, you are inferior to even a woman. Though Zai Bingyun should have died 10,000 times over, she at least had some backbone. Faced with death, she had only chosen to fight. Unlike you who are close to prostration, Luo Chongfeng flew into a sudden fury. He was the holy son of the Thundercloud Palace, and usually it would only be others prostrating in front of him. Ling Han, you are digging your own grave, he shouted loudly. Don't think that just because you have the 9 heavens flame and the Xianxia source water you can look down on every being in this world. You are only in 3rd severance, and any dividing soul tier would be able to easily suppress you. If a dividing soul tier directly came into contact with a source power, that would definitely mean death. But facing a 3rd severance, a dividing soul tier elite could just crush him with a palm strike from afar. So how could they possibly allow Ling Han the chance to approach them? Ling Han laughed. Luo Changfeng, do you think that 2 great source powers are the trump cards that allow my arrogance? His trump card was the Black Tower. At least, a dividing soul tier, or even immortal palace tier, could not possibly discover a clue of it. Luo Changfeng couldn't help but pause, and an incredibly strong coldness suddenly surged up in his heart. If even 2 source powers weren't Ling Han's trump cards, then what was his real trump card? In this world, was there anything stronger than a source power? The only thing that Luo Changfeng could think of was a celestial king. But how could Ling Han be bringing a celestial king with him everywhere he went? Wasn't that a joke? But no matter how he looked at it, Ling Han did not seem to be an idiot. The latter clearly knew that he would not end well if he killed both himself and Zai Bingyun. But he had still made his move without any reservations, and hunted them down without any scruples. You, who exactly are you? This time, Luo Changfeng was really shocked, and felt that even the Thundercloud Palace could not give him any sense of security. You guess, Ling Han said smilingly. All of a sudden, innumerable thoughts streaked through Luo Changfeng's heart. There were 9 heavens to the Celestial King tier, and each level brought one closer to ascending the heavens. This was not just mere empty words. Even if they were both Celestial King tier sects, how could one that was created by a 1st heaven Celestial King compare to one that was established by a 2nd heaven Celestial King? There was a gap of who knew how much. The Celestial King of the Thundercloud Celestial King was a 1st heaven Celestial King, but even though he was the lowest level among Celestial Kings, a Celestial King was still a Celestial King, and he could reign for all eternity. As long as he was not deadly enemies with another Celestial King, he would be an eternal existence. Could it be that Ling Han was the descendant of a 2nd heaven, or 3rd heaven Celestial King? In fact, even 9th heaven Celestial King? If that was not the case, where would he have gotten such confidence from? Furthermore, what Celestial King would bear to bestow 2 source powers of heaven and earth onto their disciple? Only a 9th heaven Celestial King would, because he had already reached the ultimate apex, so even the source power of heaven and earth would not have the slightest significance for him any longer. He gritted his teeth and asked, "What if I agree to accept you as my master?" When he said these words, his heart was also squeezing painfully, and he felt as if his whole world had collapsed on him. The revered and prestigious Holy Son of the Thundercloud Palace actually took the initiative to beg to become someone else's lackey. To actually speak these words, putting aside the fact that Luo Changfeng felt his face burn, Ling Han was also slightly shocked. Fuck, was this guy really a holy son? He was too shameless, wasn't he? There were some things that could be done and some things that could not. No one was willing to die, and Ling Han could understand that. He, too, feared death, but if it was for the sake of protecting his lovers and family, he would step out without the slightest hesitation. If it was for the sake of guarding his pride, he would also rather die than kneel. This was called having a backbone. As a holy son, and a holy son of a Celestial King tier sect at that, Luo Changfeng could actually prostrate himself to such an extent. This was the epitome of shamelessness. "You make me disgusted," Ling Han said. He sent out a palm strike. Luo Changfeng had already entered his scope of attack. Banish! Luo Changfeng's face was burning red, yet he was indifferent internally. As a mighty emperor tier, a rare divine fetus that would only appear once in millions and millions of years, how could he die in a tiny mystery realm? He had boundless prospects in his future, and the destination of his journey was the stars and universe. Fuck! His vision darkened, and he had already entered into a separate dimension. Luo Changfeng didn't know what had happened, and naturally paled in shock. He hurriedly unleashed his full power, and began a mad barrage of attacks. Originally, This separate dimension could be maintained for about a breath's time, but under his furious blasting, it immediately shattered. Luo Changfeng charged out, and then saw an iron fist descending onto his face. This little bit of time was enough for Ling Han to catch up to him. Luo Changfeng was astonished, and hurriedly stretched out a fist to parry this blow. Pong! As the fist landed, his whole person was instantly sent into a drastic retreat. After his arm guards had been overused, his battle prowess had also fallen to rock bottom, and he was no longer able to match Ling Han. Ling Han did not let him off now that he was at the advantage, and shot out another punch. Pong! Luo Changfeng was again sent backwards, and this time he had even flown through the air. Ling Han used Lightning Flash to catch up to him. At present, this was the improved version of Lightning Flash. In an instant, he had caught up to Luo Changfeng, and then his fists showered down like rain. Pong, 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 pong. The hard fists landed madly, and Luo Changfeng could only endure the barrage. Under the onslaught, his limbs were spread apart, and his whole body was trembling madly. He threw up blood like mad, and his chest very soon caved in under Ling Han's blows. And then his chest was punched through from the force. Blood spurted out, and his bones and organs were visible. Ling Han was unmoved, and when he sent out another punch, he had already condensed the 9 heavens flame. Once this blow landed, Luo Changfeng would die without a doubt. By this time, Luo Changfeng had finally lost all hope and given up. He knew that it was impossible that Ling Han would spare him. His eyes suddenly bulged, and he released his final exclamation as he roared, "Then let us die together!" His eyes were crying tears of blood, but they were immediately turned into ash by the lightning that was bursting out of his body. His whole figure had become blazing white. He had lost his physical body, and instead turned into a ball formed completely of lightning. Natural lightning physique, divine fetus, was actually formed by a section of Celestial King tier regulations. And now, with his life as price, he had detonated Thu's portion of Celestial King tier regulations. It was enough to kill any severing mundane tier. Luo Changfeng's face bore a twisted grin. If that was how it was, then he would just bring some company on his way to the underworld. Very foolish and naive. Ling Han shook his head. Didn't he see that Zai Bingyun had also exploded her own body? But what use was it against him? Are you even stronger than Zai Bingyun? Even if you are, just how much more powerful could you be? Boom! Lightning exploded, turning into a massive circular zone of explosive lightning. Bolts of lightning interwove closely together, destroying all life in that vicinity. Under this kind of shock wave, to say nothing of fourth severance, even a severing mundane tier peak stage king tier could be insta-killed. Even if he had not been insta-killed, he would have to suffer severe injuries at least. How could the self-explosion of a divine fetus as well as an emperor tier be anything ordinary? However, when the lightning had wreaked enough havoc, Ling Han was still standing proudly, but what rendered him speechless was the fact that the clothes that he had just fucking put on were again turned into nothing, and he was again completely naked. Luo Changfeng's body had already turned into ash, but his spirit had not completely dissipated. Before returning to the Tao of heaven and earth, he looked at Ling Han in defiance. Even such a blow wasn't able to make Ling Han sustain the slightest injury. Just what kind of monster are you exactly? In the end, he was still unable to ask the final question. His spirit dissipated and returned completely to the heaven and earth. Ling Han's eyes swept over the surroundings. At a very far distance, there were 3 people that were presently trembling with fear. When his eyes passed over them, the 3 of them immediately turned around and fled. Terror-stricken, they were fleeing at an extremely fast speed. Lin Fong, Teng Sen, Wei Nian, the 3 that had previously fled. Ling Han did not chase after them. Their distance was really too far, and those 3 were also king tiers, so how could they be caught up with so easily? Husband! The Empress arrived elegantly from afar, and threw herself into his arms. Bewitching Maiden Ro stood in the distance, feeling fire burning her pretty face. She was also speechless. In a single day, she had actually seen Ling Han naked twice. Was he doing it on purpose? Ling Han was also speechless. Who would have known that Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng would destroy his clothes, and then come over to embrace him before self-explosion, which again turned him naked. Did she think he wanted to look like this? However, my figure is actually extremely perfect, so it is to your advantage. Ling Han was embraced by the Empress, and didn't even have the time to put on any clothes. Thus, he could only enter into the Black Tower in a flash. In any case, this had to be only an ordinary spatial god tool in the eyes of bewitching Maiden Ro. The Empress offered a kiss. Her beloved was domineering and showed his might, causing her passion to ignite like fire. She did not care for the situation or location. If she liked something, she would show her emotions. Everything in this world was ants to her, so what need was there for her to be concerned about the thoughts of others? Having the Empress clinging on to him, and she was looking so alluring and seductive at that. Just ask, who would be able to resist such temptation? Ling Han naturally was no exception. Furthermore, he had no need to resist either. This was his wife, a woman he could justly, honorably, and boldly love. After a bout of intimacy, Ling Han and the Empress finally exited the Black Tower. Actually, the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden had also joined them in the middle, and the preposterous eroticism that they had indulged in naturally could not be expressed to outsiders. In any case, Ling Han's legs had turned weak. After exiting the Black Tower, they saw that the mountain cave had still not opened, and Ling Han couldn't help but feel guilty. Don't worry, I will not take advantage of the opening to steal the treasure, bewitching Maiden Ro declared in irritation. Seeing how the Empress looked so astonishingly alluring despite maintaining her bearing of austerity, she knew what she and Ling Han had just been doing. This caused her face to flush red. Are you guys aware that there is another person here? Though I can't see you, I can feel that you are within the vicinity, so I would still feel embarrassed, all right? Ling Han smiled faintly. Even if bewitching Maiden Ro wanted to steal the treasure, she couldn't possibly do so, either. That was because the heavenly Tao Jade was formed through the source power of Earth having evolved through millions and millions of years, and was not something that could be retrieved by a fourth severance at all. No matter what, she would have to possess Celestial King tier techniques, like Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng. Otherwise, it would only result in her death. Ling Han definitely would not say this, though. He merely looked at that cave, and thought that he had only indulged with the Empress for a single day this time round. It seemed like it could be ranked in the top 5 of the shortest periods of time that they had made love for. As expected, with something still lingering in his mind, he could not go all out. Seeing his distracted expression, bewitching Maiden Ro was almost exploding with fury. This was practically the largest stain in the history of the Purity sect. To actually be distracted while he was with her, and he was thinking of another woman at that. Could anyone bear that? In any case, she couldn't. After waiting for another day, the mountain cave finally opened. The rocks miraculously melted, revealing the passage of entry. The heavenly Tao Jade was formed from the source power of Earth, so it was very ordinary that it possessed this kind of ability. On this day, Ling Han did a few things, such as plundering the spatial god tools that Luo Changfeng and Zai Bingyun had left behind. There was a considerable amount of good stuff inside. A descendant of a Celestial King tier force was indeed rich and imposing. Both the Empress and bewitching Maiden Ro stayed outside. They were not members of the race of dwarves, nor did they have any Celestial King tier techniques, so they could not possibly oppose the power of regulation of the heavenly Tao Jade. They could die very easily. Ling Han was protected by the 9 heavens flame. There was an abundance of fire element here, and added with the fact that he had cultivated the flame control technique, he could unleash the full might of the 9 heavens flame. It was not dark inside the mountain cave. Multiple stalactites were exuding a gentle light. The whole cave was not large. He had only walked half a mile, and there was already no further path ahead of him. A large rock that was flatter than the others stood out in front of him, and there were 2 infants that lay on it. They looked like they were just a few months old. They neither cried nor fussed, and when they realized Ling Han had entered, they both cast curious gazes at him as they surveyed him. Ling Han knew that these were dwarves that had been birthed from the heavenly Tao Jade. He couldn't help but feel rueful. Ultimately, the race of dwarves had not gone extinct. He picked up the 2 infants and released all the corpses from the dwarves' village from the Black Tower with a wave of his hand. This would be the resting grounds of all the dwarves. After doing all this, he looked ahead. There was a stone pedestal which held a precious pearl. It was exuding a gentle light. Upon a closer look, that precious pearl was actually carved from jade, but the slightest signs of being carved could not be seen. It should be naturally shaped and formed by the powers of heaven and earth. Heavenly Tao Jade. Small Tower spoke up, and there was actually a tremble in its voice. In this world, there is a pitifully small amount of heavenly Tao Jade, and usually an epoch would be needed to truly nurture a single piece. In truth, from heavenly Tao source rock to heavenly Tao Jade, this process only needed a few 100 million years, but the formation of the heavenly Tao source rock itself would need a very long time, and since that time was counted into the formation of the heavenly Tao Jade, that naturally meant an incredibly prolonged period of time. Ling Han couldn't help but say, "At first celestial kings were also considered few and far between, but afterwards you said that there was an overwhelmingly large number of them. Could it be that, in some celestial king tier sect, there would be as many as a pile of heavenly Tao Jade too?" Small Tower hesitated slightly, and then said, "That is not impossible. Celestial kings had absolutely no limit to their lifespan. To say nothing of an epoch, they would be able to live for 100 or even 1,000 epochs. Then, in their extended lives, it was actually not very hard to understand that they had obtained more than one heavenly Tao Jade. This is the confidence of a great sect," Small Tower said. "For example, the Rock Palace." "You seem to know a lot about the Rock Palace," Ling Han said in a questioning tone. Small Tower paused slightly and then said, "If we come down to it, we have some relations with the Rock Palace as well." "What?" Ling Han was astonished, and thoughts streaked through his mind. Involuntarily, a shocked expression appeared on his face. Then, the previous imperial empress having died in the lower realm is actually no coincidence. Hee. How could there be anything so coincidental in this world? Small Tower did not avoid the issue this time round, and it seemed like it wanted to let Ling Han know some secrets. "What kind of force is the Rock Palace?" Ling Han was curious now. "Ninth Heaven Celestial King tier," Small Tower replied seriously. Ling Han felt hot blood rush through his veins, but then immediately frowned. "But the previous imperial empress of Rock Palace has already died." "There is another," Small Tower said smilingly, "and that is the person that was called Old Witch." Ling Han almost spluttered. "That old woman using a walking cane? Fuck, that was actually a Ninth Heaven Celestial King. No wonder she was so awesome." "Hang on," Ling Han hurriedly said. "Why didn't that old witch discover your presence? Moreover, why didn't you acknowledge each other? If that hadn't been the case, he would not have to be separated from his parents, lovers, and son for so long." Small Tower slowly said, "Firstly, as long as you don't use the Black Tower right in front of a Celestial King, then even a Ninth Heaven Celestial King couldn't possibly discover it. Secondly, before everything is clear, there is no one that could be fully trusted. Thirdly, if you had gone to the Celestial Realm early on, it would have been detrimental to your development. The path of a heavenly venerable tier has always begun from a small world and all the way onwards. Just who exactly is the heavenly venerate that you speak of?" Ling Han immediately pointed out. Since Small Tower said that their branch had some relation to the Rock Palace, this heavenly venerate's abilities had to be strong enough. Otherwise, how could he have had relations with a Ninth Heaven Celestial King? There were 9 heavens in Celestial King tier, and every single step forwards was as difficult as ascending the heavens. How could that be a mere joke? Small Tower became silent again. After a while, it finally said, "Stop blabbering nonsense, and retrieve the heavenly Tao Jade quickly. If you want to know more, first you have to advance into the 5th severance, and second, quickly advance your cultivation level. With your present strength, you would only be seeking your own death if you knew too many secrets." "Fuck! You Tsundra Tower!" Ling Han looked ahead. This place was covered with the regulations of the Great Tao, and aside from the race of dwarves that was of the same origins as the heavenly Tao Jade, other beings would be immediately crushed by the regulations of the Great Tao once they entered into this place. However, if Ling Han ignited the Nine Heavens flame, that would be enough to oppose it. This similarly was a source power of heaven and earth. Strictly speaking, the heavenly Tao Jade was no longer a source power of heaven and earth. It had already evolved from being a source power of heaven and earth and become a different object. Small Tower has said before that every elemental source power of heaven and earth could only be maintained at the apex number of 9, such as the 9 great ancestral flames. Before an ancestral flame had vanished, it was impossible for an ancestral flame to be born. But heavenly Tao Jade was different. There could be many of them because it was not a source power of heaven and earth. Refining the heavenly Tao Jade could not form the source power of earth inside one's body, and could only compensate for the regrets that one had experienced in the path of cultivation before, and open a path towards becoming a supreme monarch tier for a flawless emperor tier. Though this path would be a very, very narrow escape. Ling Han strode forwards. When he had gotten to a specific distance, the heavenly Tao Jade shone, and the light was so intense that it seemed like a sun. The ripple of regulations became even stronger, wanting to forcibly erase Ling Han. Unfortunately, this kind of power of regulation was removed from cultivation level, so Ling Han was completely able to use Nine Heavens Flame to resist it. Essentially, they were both source powers of heaven and earth, so neither was inferior to the other. Furthermore, if one Nine Heavens Flame was not enough, he still had the Xianxia source water. Ling Han did not draw upon the Xianxia source water, because Nine Heavens Flame was enough to match it. However, his speed slowed down considerably. Still, he had finally still managed to reach the stone pedestal. He stretched out a hand to grab the heavenly Tao Jade, which he then later stored into the Black Tower. Smoothly and without a hitch. Amazing! Wang, the whole mountain cave fluctuated, and a change that was indiscernible to the naked eye took place. Ling Han knew that from now onwards, it was impossible for the tribe of dwarves to be birthed from this place in future. The 2 infant dwarves that he was presently holding would be the last descendants of this tribe. He had to think of some way for them to blend in with the normal humans, marry, and give birth to the next generation. Ling Han was confident that he could change the fates of these 2. Small Tower. Is this heavenly Tao Jade considered big or small? Ling Han asked, slightly anticipatory. He did not want to benefit alone from a treasure. It was best if the Empress could share the benefits with him. If possible, he also planned to bring a little for Hunyo. However, the Rock Palace was a supreme sect that even possessed natural peach seal, so perhaps they did not just have a single heavenly Tao Jade either. Small Tower humphed and said, "This heavenly Tao Jade is not to be used by 2 people. Ling Han was instantly extremely disappointed. It is enough for 3 to use. Small Tower added. 3 people. Ling Han was at first stunned, which was followed by great joy. This damn Small Tower actually caused him a moment of needless worry. After the pleasant surprise had passed, he couldn't help but feel curious, and asked, "Didn't you say that the heavenly Tao Jade can only allow 2 people to refine it at most? If you think that 3 people is too many, you can throw away whatever's left," Small Tower said very shamelessly. "Fine then, it's your win." Ling Han shook his head as he headed back outside, each arm holding an infant. Actually, the infants of the race of dwarves were not small. They were basically the same size as the adult dwarves. Clearly, they would not grow any further once they were born. Is there any way for them to become normal humans? Ling Han asked Small Tower. "You are truly ignorant," Small Tower scoffed. "The reason why this race is so small in build is because they do not cultivate. Once their cultivation level increases, their build would naturally grow bigger, so what need is there for you to worry about them? Right?" He was again looked down on. Ling Han rubbed his chin in self-reflection. Was there any time that he would not be looked down on by Small Tower? No, definitely not. This Tsundra Tower seemed to take joy in striking him down. He had really never seen this kind of precious tool. It was really too disrespectful to its master. "Heh, well, I'm so sorry," Small Tower said with a fake smile while using a tone that would incite irritation. Ling Han could confirm that Small Tower and the large black dog had to be bad friends. Even the way they threw out mocking remarks was similar. This also made him feel curious. Just what kind of character was the master of the Tower of Three Realms to be able to create a tool spirit like Small Tower? Had the large black dog also been badly influenced by that person? Seeing Ling Han carry out two infants, both bewitching Maiden Ro and the Empress were surprised. You had gone in to retrieve treasure, but why had you carried two little precious out? Ling Han briefly explained the situation, and only then did the two women know that these were the last descendants of the race of dwarves. Let's leave this place. The three of them went back in the direction they had come from, and this place had also completed its mission. Perhaps it would return to being ordinary not long after. Regarding the heavenly Dao Jade, Ling Han only told the Empress. This precious jade could be used by three people, and bewitching Maiden Ro had indeed shared in the tough and easy times with them, but to allow her to take a share in the heavenly Dao Jade just for that, Ling Han had to admit that he could not bring himself to do it. Their relations were not as good as that. Unfortunately, the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden had not advanced into the severing mundane tier yet. Otherwise, she could use the heavenly Dao Jade as foundation to make up for the previous imperfections. Then, even if she did not strike the heaven and earth, she would be able to forcibly reverse the circumstances. For the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden to take this step, she would need at least 100 million years at least. Even if Ling Han gave her celestial medicines to consume every day, it could not possibly shrink down the time too much. The step from mortality to immortality was really too hard. It was the true deciding factor that would differentiate king tiers, prodigies, and normal people. A day later, they had arrived at the Ascending Dragon Palace. There was nothing stopping their way. They exited the palace, and that massive volcano once again appeared ahead of them. Black smoke was wafting from it, and the smell of sulfur was everywhere in the air around them. The two infants had naturally been sent into the Black Tower. Coincidentally, the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden was very bored, so giving her two babies to take care of would help her pass some time. I will definitely repay your life-saving debt, bewitching Maiden Ro said to Ling Han, slightly indignant. This guy actually ignored her charms their whole way here, causing her to doubt herself. Was she really a great bewitching maiden that would cause chaos in the world? However, Ling Han was too dangerous. Not only had he killed the descendants of two celestial king tier forces, most importantly, witnesses were left alive after that. She did not dare to mingle too closely with Ling Han, or she too would be attacked. If a celestial king tier force made a move, what was the purity sect worth? Thus, she definitely had to draw a clear dividing line. Ling Han smiled slightly and casually tossed a jade vial over. Pa! Bewitching Maiden Ro caught it and asked, "What is this?" "Tea leaves," Ling Han replied casually, and wrapped an arm around the Empress's slender waist as they continued onwards. The Empress, meanwhile, was a little displeased. That was a 9 revolutions charm physique, and her husband should have snatched her over as his bed partner so that he could increase his cultivation level. Why should she be allowed to benefit another? But since Ling Han was so insistent, she was not willing to resist Ling Han's wishes, either. In any case, the lifespan of a cultivator was prolonged, and there would come a chance eventually. Even if bewitching Maiden Ro really did marry, couldn't they still kidnap the bride? She thought without the slightest concern. There was nothing that she dared not do in this world. So what if it was a celestial king? Sooner or later, she too would be able to ascend to this cultivation level and challenge all the strongest in this world. Bewitching Maiden Ro almost smashed the vial in her hand into the back of Ling Han's head. Though she admitted that Ling Han had saved her life, she had also helped Ling Han and the Empress afterwards. No matter what, it could be considered they had stuck together in hard times, and now they had obtained some kind of precious treasures, but actually used a vial of tea leaves to dismiss her? How could anyone do that? However, she ultimately did not throw it. If she did, wouldn't it be a bigger loss to her? She would really end up completely empty-handed. Just wait. She would immediately steep these tea leaves, and then drink the tea down in front of Ling Han to vent her ire. She only had to open the lid of the vial, and she would realize how very precious this vial of tea leaves was. They were tea leaves that had been sprouted from the mother tree of the heaven and earth. Though its effects were slightly weaker at present, it was definitely a precious treasure to any severing mundane tier. Ling Han had no intention to clarify matters. From a certain aspect, he was also mischievous. He and the Empress advanced towards that gigantic volcano. With the 9 Heavens Flame and Flame control technique Ling Han had grasped, not only did he want to obtain even more Blood Dragon Stones, he also had a sliver of curiosity. Just what kind of story did that Celestial King have? Because it had taken a long amount of time for him to retrieve the Heavenly Dao Jade, Ling Han and the Empress were seriously left behind. They could not see a single person in their surroundings, and the Blood Dragon Stones along their way had naturally all been collected by others. It was practically impossible for any to be left. Ling Han and the Empress did not have that in mind, either. Their target was that volcano, and they were resolute to do something big. Bewitching Maiden Ro did not fall too far behind them because she, too, wanted to go to that volcano. The reason was very simple. She, too, had cultivated the flame control technique. However, because she did not have the Black Tower, the time she had cultivated for was naturally short, and her grasp of the flame control technique was far from being comparable to that of Ling Han and the Empress. But even so, she was still able to advance much further than others. One could not just walk around here completely unreserved even with the Blood Dragon armor. The closer one got to the volcano, the more frightening the fire element of heaven and earth would be. Even the Blood Dragon armor could not fully protect them. After over a dozen days, they arrived at a canyon. This was the area that was closest to the volcano. If they went on further, even the Blood Dragon armor would melt. This canyon was astonishingly huge. It was said that this was also a very precious site. Among the areas that everyone could enter, the Blood Dragon Stones in this canyon numbered the most. Most people would stay a good few years here and search for Blood Dragon Stones every day. Moreover, the canyon was also a natural barrier. There was an underground stream here which effectively decreased the invasion of fire element, largely extending the lifespan of the Blood Dragon armor. Thus, even if a considerable number of people would search for Blood Dragon Stones outside the canyon, they would still come back here every once in a while so that their Blood Dragon armor could rest for a while. When Ling Han and the Empress arrived at this canyon, they saw that this place was like a marketplace, and there were extraordinarily many people here. As they entered into the canyon, a group of 5 just happened to walk out of the canyon. And both sides paused. That was because those 5 people just happened to be Fu Gaoyun and his followers, as well as Fu Xiaoyun and Situ Xiaozhen. "Be brother Ling?" Fu Gaoyun looked at Ling Han, his expression very strange. To say nothing of him, the expressions on Cheng Zhong and the others' faces weren't much better, either. That was because Ling Han's head was presently completely bald. He had lost even his brows. That appearance naturally was very disharmonious no matter how they looked. Ling Han rubbed his bald head and gritted his teeth. He had forgotten about this, and now? Great, his image was completely ruined. "Hee, how are your profits?" he asked, changing the topic. "Brat Ling, is your ass all right?" Situ Xiaozhen asked with some concern. Ling Han almost threw up a mouthful of blood. "Only my head has gone bald, so why are you so concerned about my ass? Do the two have any relation between them? What kind of leaping thought process do you have here?" Fu Xiaoyun could only flush bright red and pretend she had not heard. She really was completely helpless about this Situ Xiaozhen whose thoughts were filthy to the extreme. Thankfully, Fu Gaoyun piped up at the right moment and said, "Not too bad. The volcanic eruption this time was extremely ferocious, and there are more Blood Dragon Stones than the previous few times. Our luck wasn't too bad. We encountered a bountiful year." "Ling Han, why have you arrived only now?" Cheng Zhong asked. Though the two of them had already clarified their relationship, seeing Fu Gaoyun being so cordial, he could only open his mouth and show some concern. Ling Han smiled and said, "I was held back by some matters." He had no intention of showing off. Immediately, Cheng Zhong's expression became prideful. "Even traveling here was a bumpy road for you? You were really quite inferior. Isn't this Ling Han?" Another voice rang out, and Bei Xianming walked over, his arms crossed behind his back. Meanwhile, a few people tailed behind him, and one of them stood out the most. seeming like a sharp sword that had been unsheathed. Though Bei Xianming was a holy son, and was furthermore clearly the leader of these few people, his limelight was completely stolen by this person. He was a fourth Severance Peak stage, and had settled in this cultivation level for who knew how many years, tempering his battle prowess to an incredibly frightening extent, and only then could he show off so much strength. How outrageously bold! Having offended the heiress of a celestial king-tier clan, you actually still dare to appear so bravely here. I really have no idea where your courage comes from. Bei Xuanming's expression was filled with mockery. He had been waiting a very long time for this day to come. Ling Han looked at him as if he was looking at a clown. Do you want to know just how bold I can be? Foolish clown, you won't be able to make trouble for too many days more. Once Celestial Maiden Zai encounters you, she will definitely take your life. Bei Xianming scoffed, then swept his eyes over Fu Xiaoyun, and said, Fu Xiaoyun, you gave me up just for the sake of this piece of trash? Heh, are you regretting it now? Fu Xiaoyun's expression was filled with disdain. The reason why she was not willing to marry Bei Xianming was not because she had fallen for another, but purely because she had seen through the true character of Bei Xianming. He was the type to avenge every slightest fault, and did not have any tolerance at all. How could this kind of man be worthy of her? She didn't bother to pay him any attention either. She only pursed her lips slightly, and pretended that this person in front of her was empty air. Bei Xianming couldn't help but feel his anger rise when he was given the cold shoulder, but being wary of Fu Gaoyun, he did not make a move. However, Fu Gaoyun had given all the slots of entry to his subordinates, and actually did not bring an elite with him. This was really too stupid. Bei Xianming turned around, and asked that showy person, Shaolin, are you getting an itch in your fists? The person broke into a grin, and asked, Whom does Lord Holy Sun want me to thrash? There, those few of them. Bei Xianming pointed in the direction of Fu Gaoyun. This ex-brother-in-law of his had always looked down on him, and he had worked earnestly on gaining his favor for nothing. Fuck. And now, since the betrothal was over in any case, he should teach him a harsh lesson, and vent his anger. Revenge? To say nothing of the fact that he would not enter into the Fu clan's territory after this at all, even if they would occasionally have relations. With the prestige of the lunar sect, what could the Fu clan do to him? It was fine as long as there was no fatality. That showy person's name was He Shaolin. He looked towards Fu Gaoyun with a slightly disdainful smile, and said, You all can join forces against me. It will save me some energy as I can deal with all of you in one go. Fu Gaoyun and the others were furious. However, the Fu clan itself had this kind of strange genius. They clearly knew how formidable this kind of strange genius could be, so how could they dare to seek their own humiliation? They all forcibly suppressed their anger. Hu asked Fu Gaoyun not to have brought a single strange genius of this sort with him to save on the entry places. What is it? You don't dare to even make your move. He Shaolin scoffed with a disdainful grin. And you call yourself an heir of the Fu clan. You are practically a spineless coward. You are a fourth Severance Peak stage, and you can actually bring yourself to challenge us like this? Fu Xiaoyun couldn't bear having her brother be mocked like this, and stretched out a hand to rebuke him. Weak is weak. What excuse is there to be found? He Shaolin asked coldly. Could it be that cultivation was thrown down by the gods on him? It was he himself that had cultivated with much toil and difficulty. Fu Gaoyun lowered his hand in a pressing motion, signaling to his sister not to be rash. He darkly declared, I will admit defeat this time. In the outside world, who would really have a just battle with you? Power was might. Who asked Bei Xianming to have the might now? Let's go. He waved a hand, planning to leave with his party. What is it? Planning to leave with just a few words. Bei Xianming couldn't help but smirk coldly. Don't you know the rules? Since you have admitted defeat, you have to leave something behind. Fu Gaoyun gritted his teeth and raised his right hand. Pa, he slashed down with a palm strike, and blood spattered in all directions. His left arm had been severed. Brother! Fu Xiaoyun exclaimed in shock. Yet Fu Gaoyun did not even cast a look at her, and only set his eyes on Bei Xianming. Is that enough? Bei Xianming laughed loudly. This idiot. Previously, he had curried favor with him, and he had not cared for it. And now? He had finally suffered the consequences of his own actions. However, did he think that that was the end of the matter? Since Bei Xianming had started this matter, it was natural that courage had given rise to his evil intentions. He coldly declared, "Not enough." This time, even Cheng Zhong and the others felt unbridled fury. He said it was not enough even with having one arm severed? Then what more did he want? Bei Xianming set his eyes on Fu Xiaoyun, and his lips quirked, showing a vicious expression. Fu Xiaoyun, the reason for this scene today is all because of you. Since that is the case, whoever started the trouble should end it. What do you want? Fu Xiaoyun bit her lip tightly. Take off your clothes, Bei Xianming stated calmly. Let everyone admire your beautiful figure. He had already dismissed the thought of marrying Fu Xiaoyun, and once a man was intent on revenge, he would sometimes be even more malicious than any woman, and Bei Xianming was precisely that kind of man. Fu Xiaoyun's face instantly turned pale. To be completely naked in public, what face would she have to see others in future? Even if she eventually became a celestial king in future, this would become a humiliation that would never be erased. Situ Xiaozhen was the first to lose control, and immediately leaped out and said, "Are you fucking still a man? Come on then. If you have the guts, come and rape me. See if I won't squeeze you to death." At first, Ling Han planned to make a move to get them out of the dilemma, but hearing such formidable words from her, the muscle in his cheek involuntarily twitched madly. Thankfully, old Situ Tang was not here. Otherwise, if he had heard these words, he would probably spit out a mouthful of blood, killed by his towering fury. Even Bei Xianming gritted his teeth. Even if someone gave him courage, he would not dare to rape the granddaughter of a 3-star alchemist. He waved a hand and said, "Shaolin, since Miss Fu is unwilling to save her brother, then just beat them all into submission. Understood, Lord Holy Sun." The Shaolin slightly bowed. He knew that Bei Xianming's future accomplishments would definitely be above his, and thus displayed much respect. Then, he turned a sinister look on Fu Gaoyun and his group. He Shaolin wasn't a king tier, so he more so desired to crush king tiers under his feet. This could be regarded as the most mesmerizing sensation in the world. His expression was haughty as he gazed at Fu Gaoyun, and he would definitely crush Fu Gaoyun's face under his feet today. Even if Fu Gaoyun became a dividing soul tier elite or even immortal palace tier elite in the future, he still wouldn't be able to wash away the humiliation of today. Heh! My horizons have been broadened again today. I finally witnessed the true meaning of shamelessness and having no bottom line, Ling Han said with a shake of his head. He then calmly strode forward. The Empress stood behind him and clasped her hands behind her back. She couldn't be bothered dealing with such trash. Ling Han, there's no need to hurry. It's not your turn yet, Bei Xianming said with a sneer. Did Ling Han think that he would forgive him? How naive. But I'm already getting impatient, Ling Han said as he continued to advance. He wasn't interested in watching Bei Xianming's deplorable performance. Moreover, even though he had already cut off all ties with Fu Gaoyun, he had still received many benefits from him, after all. At the very least, the Empress Blood Dragon armor had been given to her by Fu Gaoyun. In addition, Fu Gaoyun was also a fairly decent person. "Halt!" a man shouted as he dashed over from behind Bei Xianming. He raised a fist and swung it toward Ling Han. Since an underling was present, their master naturally wouldn't need to step forward. Otherwise, what would such an underling be for? Boom! The fist swung over with an astonishing might, drawing on the power of the Great Tao and forming numerous symbols in the air. This was a third Severance elite who had already reached the peak stage. In reality, his battle prowess was even superior to that of Bei Xianming. He was only weaker than he Shaolin. This punch yearned to brutally crush Ling Han. Ling Han instantly replied with a strike of his own. No one saw how he achieved it, but with a casual move, he instantly grabbed the man's wrist and forcefully stopped him in his tracks. Bei Xianming's jaw dropped in astonishment. Ling Han was only at the first Severance, so he hadn't imagined that he would be powerful enough to rival a third Severance elite, regardless of how freakish he was. However, Ling Han's action instantly gave him a slap across the face. Third Severance. Ling Han is actually at the third Severance. How is this possible? How many days have passed? Yet he's already advanced from the first Severance to the third Severance? He's already surpassed my cultivation level? How can such a thing have occurred? Does pummeling people feel good? Ling Han asked the man before him. His expression was eerily calm. The man was almost about to wet his pants in fright. He didn't know how to answer this question. Pa! Ling Han grabbed the man's hand and swung it toward his face. Pa pa pa. Does it feel good? Does it feel good? With each time he repeated this question, he would use the man's very own hand to slap him. The man's face became bruised and battered. Yet Ling Han didn't look like stopping at all. It wasn't long before blood started to spray into the air. After that, it was broken flesh and shattered teeth that flew through the air. At this moment, even the man's bones had become visible. This was a bloody and brutal sight. However, Ling Han felt absolutely no sympathy. After all, this man had clearly yearned to crush him to death. If it weren't for his insane cultivation speed, and if he weren't an emperor tier, whom could he have complained to if he were beaten to death? Stop! Bei Xianming roared. He had no option but to roar. His underling was being beaten to death. So who would still agree to serve him if he didn't express his displeasure at this moment? However, would Ling Han listen to him? Pa pa pa. Ling Han continued to force the man to slap himself. At the same time, he started to drag him toward Bei Xianming. There was a murderous aura in his eyes, and it was clear that Bei Xianming was his next target. Shaolin! Bei Xianming hurriedly exclaimed. He Shaolin nodded in reply. He then leaped over with a cold sneer and said, Third Severance King Tier? Heh! Before me, you're nothing but trash. King Tiers were only invincible among those at the same cultivation level. Right now, he Shaolin possessed an advantage of one minor level, and he had more so tempered himself at the peak stage of the fourth Severance for countless hundreds of millions of years. As such, his battle prowess could completely rival that of King Tiers. That being the case, how could he not feel a sense of superiority? Ling Han dragged the collapsed man toward He Shaolin. He didn't speak, and in his eyes, it was as if He Shaolin were nothing more than a puff of air. He didn't need to pay any attention to him at all. How arrogant! He Shaolin said with a cold humph. He raised his right hand and struck at Ling Han's face. You like to slap people, yeah? Then have a taste of being slapped yourself. Pa! Ling Han raised a hand and grabbed He Shaolin's wrist. He Shaolin's expression instantly froze. How is this possible? Bei Xianming was also struck with shock and disbelief. In his eyes, He Shaolin was powerful enough to rival holy sons and holy daughters at the peak stage of the fourth Severance. Yet, his wrist had actually been caught by Ling Han. It was as if there existed a huge gulf between their battle prowess. You also want to feel good, hey? Ling Han said in a calm voice. He raised He Shaolin's hand and swung it toward his face. He Shaolin hurriedly unleashed his full power to resist. However, he was completely unable to rival Ling Han's overwhelming power. Pa! A stinging pain instantly traveled across his face. Tears of pain flowed from his eyes. These were tears of pain, yet they were also tears of humiliation. He was being slapped before so many people, so how could he endure this? Ling Han flicked his hands. Pa pa! He Shaolin and the man were thrown before Bei Xianming's feet. Their arms and legs were spread, and they had already lost their consciousness. Bei Xianming involuntarily took a step back. There was shock and fear on his face. Just like how Fu Gaoyun couldn't find any reinforcements here, he couldn't either. Although he wasn't the only holy son of the lunar sect who had entered this mystery realm, the relationship between holy sons was that of competition and rivalry. Thus, how could he seek their help in his own personal matters? Firstly, he couldn't bear the humiliation of asking them for help. Secondly, asking them for help would only cause him to become a joke. As such, he now felt just as helpless as Fu Gaoyun had felt just then. Bei Xianming gritted his teeth and said, I admit defeat. The veins in his forehead were bulging. After saying this, he commanded his underlings to help He Shaolin and the man up. Perhaps he couldn't defeat Ling Han, but he could still choose to flee, couldn't he? Ling Han humphed and said, You want to leave just like that? What do you want? Bei Xianming asked in a solemn voice. He also knew that he had to pay a price for his actions. Ling Han grinned and said, Just then, didn't you say that I should behave humbly and obediently because I offended the Ziyun clan? Heh, let me tell you something. I already killed Zai Bingyun a few days ago. Wang. Bei Xianming felt a huge and deafening tremor in his mind, and he almost fainted in shock. Lies. This is definitely a lie. If Ling Han only offended Zai Bingyun, the Zai clan definitely wouldn't hunt him at all costs even if they decided to target him. If he killed Zai Bingyun, however, the situation would become completely different. Who could humiliate a celestial king-tier force? At that time, perhaps everyone here would have to die alongside Ling Han. Bei Xianming shivered in fear, and he couldn't help but think that Ling Han was a madman. Or perhaps he was lying and playing a pointless prank. Why, you're definitely spewing bullshit. Ling Han smiled and said, You think I have the time and effort to joke around with you? Didn't you call me arrogant and audacious? Heh. I'm simply showing you just how arrogant and audacious I am. Show. With a snap of his fingers, a burst of sword light pierced through Bei Xuanming's forehead and exited through the back of his skull. Pa! Bei Xuanming's legs weakened, and he instantly fell onto his knees. At the same time, life drained from his eyes. Meanwhile, Fu Gaoyun and the others went completely numb with fear. At this moment, Fu Gaoyun also recalled a question that Ling Han had asked him in the past. He had asked whether or not he was allowed to kill Bei Xianming. Back then, Fu Gaoyun had only treated this question as a joke. Thinking back now, it was clear that Ling Han had already developed killing intent toward Bei Xianming back then. He was far too audacious. Now that he had killed Bei Xianming, would the lunar sect be willing to let things slide? To say nothing of his friendly relationship with 2 3-star alchemists, the lunar sect would decide to kill him even if he were a grandson of one of the alchemists. One could indeed act with arrogance and haughtiness if they had the support of a 3-star alchemist. However, they couldn't act as they pleased. After all, alchemists only enjoyed such a lofty status because they were supported by cultivators. In other words, cultivators could choose to give them face, yet they could also choose not to give them face. In this world, power was the ultimate deciding factor. Ling Han, Fu Gaoyun and the others exclaimed in a shaky voice. Their faces were green with dread. Ling Han glanced at them and asked, What's the matter? Upon seeing their extremely anxious expressions, he finally came to a sudden realization. Oh, don't worry, everything's fine. This isn't the first holy son of the lunar sect that I've killed. There was also another one. What was his name again? Ling Han frowned in thought. If Nangong Ting could still see after his death, he definitely wouldn't be able to close his eyes in peace. He was the holy son of a 3-star force, yet Ling Han had even forgotten his name? Fu Gaoyun and the others choked and spluttered upon hearing this. Not only were they not reassured, but they even started to feel more tense and anxious. You killed another holy son of the lunar sect? Gasp. Currently, the lunar sect only had 2 holy sons who were at the severing mundane tier. One was Bei Xianming, and the other was Nangong Ting. Brother Ling, was that person called Nangong Ting? Fu Gaoyun asked with a sliver of hope that the answer would be negative. Ling Han clapped his hands with a smile and said, Yes, it was him. Fuck. Fu Gaoyun and the others cursed in their minds. They then stared at Ling Han with a dazed expression. They didn't know how to describe this person. Could he be any more ferocious? Oh, by the way, I genuinely killed Zai Bingyun. I wasn't joking, Ling Han said with a smile. His actions had been witnessed by Lin Fong and the others, so it was already impossible for him to keep it a secret anyway. Thus, he chose to confidently admit it. He had indeed killed Zai Bingyun. Moreover, he had done so with a clear conscience. If they had only been shocked just then, Fu Gaoyun and the others were completely terrified now. Who was Zai Bingyun? She was the successor of the Zai clan, a prodigy among prodigies, and a king tier among king tiers. She was a supreme elite who had severed heaven and earth. Only celestial king tier forces could raise such an emperor tier prodigy. Moreover, only very few of these prodigies existed. Yet she had actually been killed by Ling Han. See, could he cause any more trouble? Ling Han grinned and continued, "Oh, that's right. I also killed Luo Changfeng as well." Fu Gaoyun and the others instantly collapsed to the ground. "Holy fuck!" Ling Han chuckled and said, "I've caused quite a lot of trouble, so there's no need for you guys to follow me too closely. Otherwise, some people might consider you as my accomplice. All right? Till fate brings us together again." Fu Gaoyun gazed at Ling Han for a long time before saying, "Brother Ling, I genuinely can't tell how far you'll walk in the future." He felt like his goal of becoming the clan leader of a 3-star force was already a lofty one. After all, this was a 3-star force. However, compared to Ling Han, he had already killed the successors of 2 celestial king-tier forces, and it was inevitable that he would be relentlessly hunted by the Zai clan and the Thundercloud Palace. Just Ling Han's troublemaking ability alone was already enough to render him speechless and stunned. "Gaoyun, let's go," Chang Zhong said in an urgent voice. Although he was stunned by Ling Han's actions, he didn't want anything to do with him at all. After all, the Celestial King tier forces wouldn't care about how many people they targeted when they unleashed their vengeance. He didn't want to be caught up in their revenge. Fu Gaoyun sighed with emotion before nodding at Ling Han and leaving the canyon. The others also left with him. When passing Ling Han, Fu Xiaoyun couldn't help but steal a few glances at him. Her heart fluttered slightly. Just as Bei Xianming had said, if Ling Han had remained at the Fu clan, it would have been completely possible that they might have become a couple. However, it was a shame that this was completely impossible now. Even if she were willing, the Fu clan definitely wouldn't be willing. If they became involved in a Celestial King tier force's act of revenge, their only fate would be death and destruction. "Abandon your unrealistic thoughts," the Empress said coldly. Such an indecisive woman wanted to become her sister? She wasn't worthy. Fu Xiaoyun was feeling extremely unwilling as she glanced at the Empress. Yet she was immediately rendered speechless by her stunning beauty. The others also noticed the Empress at this moment, and they were also mesmerized by her breathtaking beauty. The Empress waved her hand and said, "Piss off! Pong, pong, pong." They were instantly sent flying by the Empress. They didn't even dare to support Ling Han, so how could they be worthy of becoming his friends? Only Situ Xiaozhen was spared from this. Her reaction was much more composed, and even though she also stole a few extra glances at the Empress, she quickly came to her senses. She looked toward Ling Han and asked, "Is your ass truly okay? Fuck, what's up with your thought process? You're still hung up on this. It's as good as can be. There's no need for you to worry." Ling Han was completely helpless against this filth queen. "Oh?" Situ Xiaozhen nodded in reply. However, there was disappointment on her face, and it was clear that she had hoped to hear a bloody and brutal story. After Fu Gaoyun and the others left, Ling Han swept his cold gaze across He Shaolin and his companions. However, he decided not to kill them. Instead, he simply crippled their cultivation. This would cause them to lose all of their cultivation in a few years, at which time they would become ordinary people. With this done, he held hands with the Empress and walked into the canyon. In no time, news of him killing Bei Xianming had already spread far and wide. In fact, there were even rumors of him killing Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng. However, because they hadn't witnessed it, most people naturally chose not to believe this. In any case, was it that easy to kill the successors of Celestial King tier forces? The veracity of the former piece of news was confirmed, yet the veracity of the latter pieces wasn't. However, these rumors spread through the mystery realm at an incredible rate. Even so, no one dared to provoke Ling Han and the Empress anymore. To say nothing else, just his act of killing Bei Xianming was already reason enough for others not to provoke him. Although Bei Xianming wasn't powerful, there had been a powerful cultivator beside him. Yet, he had still been killed by Ling Han. As such, Ling Han was not only courageous, but he was also astonishingly powerful. Who would dare to provoke such a person? Moreover, what if Ling Han had genuinely killed Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng? If that were true, would he be afraid to kill a few more people? Wherever Ling Han passed, people would avoid him as if he were the plague. Even the Empress' stunning beauty couldn't tempt them into taking risks. Given a choice between a stunning beauty and their life, most people would choose to keep the latter. After all, they hadn't cultivated for hundreds of millions of years for the sake of women. However, there were always those who believed that they were an exception. They believed that as long as they had an advantage in numbers, and as long as they launched a sneak attack, they would have a chance to defeat and kill Ling Han. At that time, they would be able to use his corpse to seek rewards from the lunar sect. If Ling Han had genuinely killed Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng, they would naturally have been able to obtain even richer rewards and greater fame. Moreover, they would also be able to obtain the breathtakingly beautiful Empress as loot. This was naturally an enticing thought. There was strength in numbers, and enough ants could bite an elephant to death. Moreover, they were all powerful cultivators who were far more powerful than ants. At the very least, they could be regarded as wolves. A pack of wolves could kill a tiger. What did it matter that the tiger was the king of beasts? These cultivators contacted each other and encouraged more people to join their ranks. Surprisingly, a portion of people were indeed persuaded by their proposal. There was a surge of undercurrents, and a great number of invisible sword projections were already entangled and clashing. Ling Han stayed in the canyon for a day, taking a short rest. He had obtained a great amount of loot, and he had spent the entire day looking over it. For example, there was godly metal for his divine demon sword. Apart from obtaining a huge pile of pseudo-divine metal from Chen Zhaoyang, he had also obtained a huge amount from Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng. As the successors of powerful sects, they were all astoundingly wealthy. After feeding all of the pseudo-divine metal to his divine demon sword, this future celestial tool advanced to become a 2-star pseudo-celestial tool. It was almost 30% of the way to becoming a genuine celestial tool. Ling Han was extremely satisfied. The divine demon sword had surpassed his cultivation level again, and it was now able to rival elites at the Yin Soul and the Yang Soul. However, it was a shame that it could only rival them in terms of toughness. This was because his cultivation level was still too low, which meant that he was unable to imbue the divine demon sword with higher level regulations. As such, its might was partially restricted. However, this didn't matter. Everything would be resolved once he advanced to a suitable cultivation level. Ling Han also refined the tree heart of the white demon tree, obtaining a wisp of murderous aura in the process. This murderous aura was built upon the regulation of slaughter, and in terms of destructive ability alone, it was even more impressive than most weapons. In reality, everyone possessed a murderous aura. However, this aura was often uncontrollable. After cultivating the regulation of slaughter, however, one would be able to actively control this murderous aura. In fact, they would even be able to control the murderous aura of others. The stronger one's murderous aura, the more powerful their battle prowess would become. This was a typical case of nurturing oneself through battle, and becoming more and more ferocious through combat. The next day, Ling Han decided to set off for the final region of the volcano with the Empress. He wanted to explore the depths of this mystery realm. When they exited the canyon, however, they realized that it had suddenly become lively and boisterous. As it turned out, bewitching Maiden Ro had arrived. This seductive beauty from the Purity sect was extremely alluring and charming, with each of her actions overflowing with beauty and elegance. Countless men were enchanted by her beauty, and those who had weaker resolve were already drooling with lust. Bewitching Maiden Ro also noticed Ling Han and the Empress, and she couldn't help but grimace upon seeing them. She had naturally consumed the reincarnation tea. Moreover, because she had been angry, she had used all of the tea leaves at once. Afterward, she had fallen into inconsolable regret. That was definitely celestial tea. Although it wouldn't help one comprehend regulations, it would definitely help one comprehend the great Tao. A single dream would last for eons, and this was naturally as impressive as could be. You bastard! You gave me such a valuable treasure, yet you didn't tell me about its unique properties? You caused me to waste almost all of it. I truly want to bite you to death, you bastard. Bewitching Maiden Ro truly wanted to leap over and bite Ling Han. However, she forcefully suppressed her urge upon remembering that he was currently surrounded by trouble. If she leaped over, it was extremely likely that she would also become caught up in his mess. Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle upon seeing this. He then held hands with the Empress and walked away. However, after taking just a few steps, the earth beneath them suddenly erupted. 3 people shot out, and the weapons in their hands gleamed with a cold and murderous aura as they slashed and stabbed at Ling Han. At the same time, the boulders in the surroundings also disappeared in unison. At least 10 people leaped out and charged at Ling Han. People were charging over from everywhere, and they left Ling Han no path of escape. Ling Han was slightly astonished. He wasn't astonished about being attacked, but he was instead astonished about his enemy's concealment techniques. He hadn't detected them at all. This kind of concealment technique was fairly impressive. While he was praising their concealment technique, the attacks of his enemies had already arrived. Bewitching Maiden Ro was astonished, and she felt an urge to step forward and help Ling Han. However, upon recalling his freakish power, she immediately abandoned this thought. She had personally witnessed Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng combusting their divine fetus at that time. Even so, they still hadn't been able to defeat Ling Han. Could these dozen or so people rival the battle prowess of Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng? Pong! Their attacks landed, and the divine light of regulations burst through the air, triggering a gigantic explosion that caused the entire earth to tremor. In the distance, everyone was astonished by this sudden sneak attack, and they all turned around to spectate the battle. Ling Han was being attacked by so many people, and several of them were even king tiers. He was definitely going to be killed. Who told him to be so flagrant and eye-catching? When the divine light of regulations vanished, they saw that Ling Han and the Empress were still standing there as if nothing had even happened. They were completely unscathed, and there wasn't even a single sign of battle on their bodies. This, shocked, one of the assailants couldn't help but exclaim, "Impossible!" Even if Ling Han was capable of blocking all of their attacks, he shouldn't have been able to do so with such ease. Ling Han had naturally activated the banishing technique on himself and the Empress. With his current strength, his separate dimension naturally couldn't be shattered by such trash. Ling Han glanced at that person and said, "How can you trash understand my true power?" Pong! With a single punch, he smashed that person into a cloud of broken flesh and blood. Upon seeing this, all of his remaining assailants became pale with fright. They hurriedly turned around to flee. There were a dozen or so of them, yet there was only a single Ling Han. As such, he would only be able to catch up to 1 or 2 of them at most. However, they were far too naive. Whoosh! With a humph, the Empress summoned 10 battle beasts, each of which roared as they lunged toward an assailant. These battle beasts were terrifying, and they viciously incinerated one of the assailants, turning him into ashes in no time. The spectators almost wet their pants in fright. This couple was far too powerful, no? Ling Han also launched a casual attack, with an arc of lightning easily disposing of all of the remaining assailants. He then clapped his hands with a calm expression before holding the Empress' hand and walking away. It was as if nothing had happened just then. The spectators exchanged astonished glances with each other. They were speechless with shock. After a brief moment, they finally broke into spirited discussions, sighing with emotion as they discussed Ling Han's and the Empress's overwhelming power. Of course, some of them were also admiring the Empress' breathtaking beauty. Humph! So what if he's freakish? He's killed Bei Xianming, so he'll definitely be killed by the lunar sect when he leaves the mystery realm, someone said with jealousy and hate. So be it if Ling Han were powerful, yet he even had such a stunningly beautiful wife. Was there still justice in the world? He had obtained all of the benefits in the entire world. Indeed, does he truly think that he can pat his behind and leave after killing the holy son of a 3-star force? There was more than one person who was filled with jealousy and hate. Heh! When we leave, don't forget to inform the lunar sect of these matters, someone said. As a spectator, they weren't afraid of things exploding out of control. Many people chuckled upon hearing this. Ling Han was supremely powerful, so much so that they could barely breathe in his presence. Thus, they naturally viewed him as a thorn in their side. Although Zai Bingyun and Luo Chongfeng were also insanely powerful, they were the successors of Celestial King tier forces. In other words, they were beings that they could only look up to. They didn't dare to feel jealousy or hatred toward them. However, who was Ling Han? He was a measly subordinate of a 3-star force. As such, how could his status surpass that of holy sons and holy daughters? Pei! Xiao! 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 At this moment, 3 figures suddenly descended from the sky. They were none other than Lin Fong, Tung San and Wei Nian. Celestial Maiden Lin, Brother Tang, Brother Wei. Everyone hurriedly greeted them with respect. These 3 individuals were all holy sons and holy daughters, and they were more so extremely talented cultivators. Otherwise, they couldn't have passed the examination in the Ascending Dragon Palace while the others all failed. "Why have you 3 only arrived now?" a holy son asked. Lin Fong pondered for a moment before saying, "It was because of Ling Han, of course." Ling Han again? Everyone faltered upon hearing this. What did Ling Han do? They all asked in curiosity. Lin Fong glanced at bewitching Maiden Ro before replying. Ling Han didn't only kill Bei Xianming. He also killed Bei Yuxiong, Chen Zhao Tian. She reeled off a long list of names, each of which corresponded to the holy son, holy daughter, or successor of a 3-star sect or 3-star clan. This. Everyone was transfixed with shock and disbelief upon hearing this. At the same time, cold sweat trickled down their foreheads. That Ling Han was an absolute demon. How many king tiers had he already killed? Fortunately, he hadn't gone on a rampage just then. However, everyone was also feeling extremely puzzled. How would Ling Han escape after exiting the Mystery Realm? With so many 3-star forces targeting him, could Ling Han escape death? Why did he insist on acting so wantonly? Lin Fong didn't reveal the news of Zai Bingyun and Luo Chongfeng being killed by Ling Han. This was because she, along with Ting San and Wei Nian, wanted to personally report this news. Although they would have to face the wrath of the Celestial King tier forces, they would also be able to make some connections with them. Everyone shook their head upon hearing this. It was inevitable that Ling Han would be killed. Perhaps the Fu clan could rival the Lunar sect, but what about all of the other 3-star forces? As such, Ling Han wouldn't be able to escape death. Ling Han and the Empress exited the canyon and entered a land that no one could enter. Ling Han was still feeling fine, yet the Empress had to channel the flame control technique. Otherwise, she would be instantly incinerated by the fire particles in this region. After arriving here, Ling Han's 9 heavens flame started to pulsate in excitement, and it was as if it wanted to leap out from his dantian. Ling Han humphed upon detecting this. Regardless of what relationship this 9 heavens flame had with the celestial king of this place before, it was now a source power that belonged to him. As such, it could only listen to his commands. Otherwise, he would rather abandon it than keep it in his body. After all, what use was a disobedient power? Moreover, this was a power that resided in his body. If it went wild, that would lead to unimaginable consequences. The 9 heavens flame instantly calmed down and became obedient. Like a scolded child, it even expressed a feeling of grievance. However, Ling Han was completely unfazed. When it came to matters that affected his power, he definitely had to make sure that there were no risks and mistakes. Several hours passed, and they had already reached the foot of the volcano. Along the way, they had also obtained a huge number of blood dragon stones. This was because no one else could venture into this area. As such, their yield was naturally very impressive. This was an accumulation of hundreds of millions of years, and it could be said that they would obtain a blood dragon stone each time they bent down. They didn't need to explicitly look for them at all. Their yield was bountiful, and bewitching Maiden Ro was also having a great time picking up blood dragon stones in the outer regions behind them. She couldn't reach the same depth as Ling Han and the Empress, yet she could still venture further than all of the other people. As such, her yield was naturally very impressive as well. Bewitching Maiden Rose eyes were filled with curiosity as she watched Ling Han and the Empress disappear from her sight. What would they find in that volcano? When the mystery realm returned to a state of wild chaos, how would they flee from the clutches of the three-star forces? Once news of his actions spread, almost half of the forces would target Ling Han and yearn for his death. Among these forces, there were even 2 Celestial King tier forces. Although you two are freakish, with one of you being at the 3rd severance and the other at the 2nd severance, I can't think of any way for you to flee from the grasp of these forces. Ling Han and the Empress started to climb the volcano. There was no path here, yet this naturally couldn't hold them back. They climbed the volcano with their hands and feet. Flying wasn't an option, as the volcano was surrounded by a chaotic aura that could easily kill anyone who came into contact with it. The erupting volcano could only suppress this chaotic aura. However, there would still be remnants of this deadly aura swirling around the volcano. Little Han. Hi, Little Han! Someone behind them shouted in an enthusiastic voice. They turned around, only to see the large black dog quickly bounding over. He was only using his hind legs, yet his speed was still astonishingly quick. It wasn't long before he caught up to Ling Han and the Empress. Ling Han was astonished, and he asked, "Why have you come over here? Grandpa Dog is about to embark on a long journey, so I especially came over here to say goodbye." The large black dog rested a paw on Ling Han's shoulder and said, "See, Grandpa Dog is a loyal individual, isn't he?" Ling Han chuckled in reply. How much trouble had this detestable dog already caused for him? Hang on a second. You've never practiced the flame control technique before, so how are you resisting the fire particles here? Even Blood Dragon armor didn't possess such a powerful protective ability. Moreover, even Immortal Palace tier elites didn't dare to venture into this area. So how had this detestable dog managed to enter? This? The large black dog scratched his head before suddenly gazing up at the sky and saying, "The weather is fairly nice today. The moon is hanging high, and the sun is shining with such radiance. Fuck the hell off." Ling Han couldn't help but ask, "Little Black, who in the world are you?" The freakish nature of the large black dog had already exceeded the abilities of severing mundane tier cultivators. Not long ago, he had even bitten a 4th Severance Grand Elder while he was only at the Genesis tier. This was also an incredible feat at the very least. Ling Han had never heard of such a freakish individual before. The large black dog's eyes darted about, and after a long while, he finally said, "Since it's come to this, Grandpa Dog won't keep you in the dark anymore. Truth be told, I'm actually your long-lost father." "Fuck off," Ling Han said as he kicked the large black dog. He actually dared to take advantage of him. The large black dog pondered for a moment before finally saying, "All right, since I'm about to leave, I'll tell you the truth so you aren't always trying to rely on me." He paused for a moment before continuing in a haughty voice, "I'm actually a Celestial King." Pooh! Ling Han instantly spluttered with laughter. This detestable dog was a Celestial King? Which Celestial King would look like this? He couldn't help but roar with laughter. However, his laughter became quieter and quieter, and in the end, he silently stared at the large black dog. This was because the large black dog was wearing an extremely solemn expression. It didn't look like he was joking. If this were any other place, Ling Han would be convinced that the large black dog was joking, even if he wore such a solemn expression. However, this was indeed a place that even Immortal Palace tier elites couldn't reach. In other words, the large black dog was at least as powerful as an ascending origin tier elite. Gasp! This detestable dog wasn't joking when he said he wanted to steal the panties of Celestial King Ling Miao? This detestable dog. Are you truly a Celestial King? Ling Han asked with a serious expression. The large black dog snickered before saying, "Just how impressive was I when I used to stride through the world? Countless female Celestial Kings yearned to become my mounts, yet I only chose the most beautiful few. They were only slightly inferior to your wife." He glanced at the Empress as he said this. Ling Han's expression was solemn, and he asked, "Why are you helping me?" The large black dog pointed at Ling Han's dantian with a smile, and he asked, "He didn't tell you?" Small tower. Ling Han's heart shuddered. Sure enough, the large black dog and small tower were acquainted. They were definitely good friends. He shook his head and replied, "No." The large black dog scratched his head and said, "Back then, I was a supreme celestial king. If I wasn't at the 9th heaven, then I was at the 8th heaven. However, for some reason, I suffered severe wounds and entered a state of slumber in order to recover. When I opened my eyes again, eons had already passed. At the same time, my cultivation also fell to rock bottom. I was unable to recall the events of the past, and only when I entered the celestial realm did I finally regain some of my past memories. My cultivation has also returned to somewhere above the ascending origin tier and below the celestial king tier. After all, it's far too difficult to advance to the celestial king tier." Ling Han felt as if he were in a dream as he listened to the large black dog's explanation. Not only was this detestable dog a celestial king, but he had even reached the pinnacle of the celestial king tier. He had been at the 8th or 9th heaven. "But I still don't understand. Why are you helping me?" Ling Han asked again. The large black dog shook his head and said, "You're far too weak right now, so it's not beneficial for you to know too much. Initially, I wanted to help you reach the celestial king tier. However, following the increase in my power, I suspect that several old monsters have already detected my presence. As such, I'll only be putting you in danger if I stay beside you." Ling Han was rendered speechless. To be referred to as old monsters by someone who had reached the 8th heaven or 9th heaven. Just what kind of beings were these? They were definitely 9th heaven celestial kings. He carefully recalled the past events. Even though the large black dog had always been causing trouble for him, this could also be viewed as an act of examining and tempering him. Moreover, even if the large black dog hadn't provoked others, would the conflict between Ling Han and them not have occurred? For example, his conflict with Zai Bingyun. For the sake of the heavenly Tao Jade, it was inevitable that there would have been a battle between them. Moreover, with Zai Bingyun's resolute nature, it was inevitable that they would have still battled to the death. The large black dog had simply caused this battle to erupt earlier. Anyhow, even if an elite had interfered, the large black dog would have been more than powerful enough to deal with them. Everything was in order to train and toughen Ling Han. Of course, the large black dog definitely wasn't an individual of great morals. He would often lie, cheat, and screw others over, and he had even set his eyes on the panties of a fellow celestial king. Only the large black dog would commit such atrocities, and only the large black dog would ponder such atrocities. Not long ago, the large black dog had also given him some suggestions regarding his cultivation. Most importantly, he had told him about the 5th severance. This was an obstacle that Ling Han had to overcome if he wanted to become a supreme celestial king. If Ling Han had unknowingly skipped this test, there would have been no chance for him to regret his decision. "Then what's up with this volcano?" Ling Han asked. A rare expression of loneliness spread across the large black dog's face as he glanced at the volcano, and he replied, "This is the burial place of an old friend. He failed while trying to advance to the 9th heaven, and his body is buried in this mystery realm. This was his own decision, and he desired for his willpower to be refined by time such that the purest of his essence would remain for future generations to use and undergo transformations." Ling Han shuddered upon hearing this. Although the 9th heaven is the pinnacle of the celestial king tier, 8th heaven celestial kings don't necessarily need to sacrifice their lives in an attempt to reach such a level, right? After reaching the 8th heaven, how many more opponents would one still have? Moreover, they would enjoy an infinite lifespan, so did they really need to roar in urgency and attempt to advance to the 9th heaven? If they waited for several epochs, perhaps they could have gathered enough source power and celestial medicines, thereby increasing their chance of success. Why did they need to risk their life? "Brat, you don't understand." The large black dog patted Ling Han's shoulder and said, "On the surface, it appears as if this is a calm and peaceful world. In reality, however, there's a terrifying killing intent hidden beneath this facade of calm. Grow as fast as you can. Otherwise, when this storm of darkness arrives, Everything will be destroyed. Ling Han knew that the large black dog wouldn't tell him any more details even if he asked. This was just like with Small Tower. When it came to these critical matters, they would always refuse to answer. Moreover, their excuse was simple: he was still far too weak. He slowly nodded in understanding. Although he was curious about this storm of darkness or whatever, he understood that his main focus right now was raising his power. How is this celestial king related to the 9 heavens flame? Ling Han asked. The large black dog chuckled before saying, source powers of heaven and earth can evolve. For example, the heavenly Tao jade that you obtained was birthed by the life force of heaven and earth. Yet, it's no longer a source power of heaven and earth. Similarly, the 9 heavens flame can also develop intelligence and awareness. At that time, it will no longer be a source power of heaven and earth. Instead, it will become a living being. Ling Han was astonished, and he asked, so you're saying that this celestial king was formed from this 9 heavens flame? No wonder the 9 heavens flame had been so excited just then. Correct, the large black dog said with a nod. This celestial king was called the Heavenly Fire Celestial King, and he was skilled in manipulating fire. After his passing, a wisp of remnant flame remained burning for hundreds of millions of years, giving birth to a new 9 heavens flame. Meanwhile, after being burned for countless hundreds of millions of years, his murderous aura has already been refined away, with only his essence remaining. I then used this essence power to temper you, not to raise your cultivation level, but instead to strengthen your cultivation foundation. This is to help you reach the pinnacle in the future. Can't others use this power? Ling Han asked. Of course not, the large black dog said proudly. This is a source power of heaven and earth, and unless it was me, it would rather return its essence to heaven and earth. Ling Han became even more curious upon hearing this. From the large black dog's reply, it was clear that the Heavenly Fire Celestial King could have still survived even though he had failed to advance to the 9th heaven. However, he had chosen to abandon his life and leave his essence for those in the future instead. Ling Han couldn't help but feel immense admiration. Come over here, brat. After preparing for hundreds of millions of years, all we yearn to see is a spark that illuminates the entire universe, the large black dog said in a solemn voice. After being tempered by this essence of a celestial king, you'll also have a greater chance of advancing to the 5th severance. After refining himself for hundreds of millions of years, the essence left behind by the Heavenly Fire Celestial King can only improve my chance of advancing to the 5th severance by a little bit. The 5th severance is far too difficult to reach. No, the 5th severance is naturally extremely difficult to reach. Moreover, your foundation is still far too weak, and you haven't been strengthened with the resources of a Celestial King tier force either. Although you've risen from a small world, and although you've reached a state of perfection in each major tier, your potential is far too important. The large black dog couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Right now, it's time for you to defy the heavens and rewrite your fate. Ling Han was slightly doubtful about this. He wasn't weaker than any prodigy. After all, weren't Zai Bingyun and Luo Changfeng also the successors of Celestial King tier forces? Yet they had still been killed by him. Moreover, his cultivation level was even inferior to theirs. The large black dog noticed his doubts, and he couldn't help but scoff and say, "You think I'm comparing you to those pieces of trash? Those I care about are the successors of celestial kings who have at least reached the 7th heaven. If you come across those prodigies, you'll understand just how terrifying they are. In this kind of small place, it's simply impossible for celestial king tier forces to raise successors who are capable of becoming celestial kings. However, in genuinely powerful sects, those who are bestowed with the title of Holy Son and Holy Daughter can definitely become celestial kings. The only difference is which heaven they can reach." Upon hearing the large black dog's words, Ling Han's haughty pride finally subsided. A solemn expression spread across his face. "There are many celestial king tier forces like this?" Ling Han asked. The Western Celestial Realm has always been more powerful than the Eastern Celestial Realm. However, even the Eastern Celestial Realm has several 9th Heaven Celestial King tier forces. It's just that you're located extremely far away from them. It's because of this that you haven't come across any true prodigy, the large black dog said. I'm not trying to deflate you, but you can only rank in the lower quartile among the genuine successors of powerful Celestial King tier forces. Ling Han was slightly unwilling to accept this again, and he said, Don't forget, I possess 2 source powers of heaven and earth. I've already taken them into account. It's because of them that you can rank in the lower quartile. Otherwise, the large black dog shook his head. Ling Han was indeed deflated by this. In the next instant, however, his fighting spirit immediately started to rage. He gazed at the peak of the volcano, and he asked, Then what about after I defy the heavens and rewrite my fate? You'll rank in the middle or perhaps in the upper quartile. The large black dog replied with uncertainty. This is only enough to reach the upper quartile? An expression of doubt spread across Ling Han's face. Was this detestable dog purposefully trying to deflate him? Even if he wanted to trigger his fighting spirit, there was no need to take things so far, right? If I told you that some have abandoned their body thousands of times in order to reach a state of perfection in the severing mundane tier, would you be so shocked that you can't even fart anymore? The large black dog said with a chuckle. Ling Han faltered upon hearing this. After a while, he finally said, Abandoning their body thousands of times, simply to reach a state of perfection in the severing mundane tier? The large black dog nodded in confirmation. Although the ultimate purpose of cultivation is to comprehend and grasp the great Tao, 10,000 people crossing the same sea might yield 10,000 different methods. Cultivation is no different. You might be severing the same heaven and earth, yet the difference between you and someone else can still be unimaginably great. I'm aware of a freakish prodigy who severed a branch of the great Tao each time he severed the mundane. After reaching the 5th severance, he would abandon his physical body and resurrect to sever more branches of the great Tao. After reaching a point where he couldn't sever any more branches of the great Tao, he finally decided to advance to the dividing soul tier. Ling Han was stunned upon hearing this. Just what kind of freak was this? Isn't it often said that one's original body is the best? Even if it's not a divine fetus, isn't it best for one to keep their original body? Ling Han asked. That's indeed the case, the large black dog said with a nod. However, if you become a celestial king in the future, you'll be able to perfectly fuse with your body even if it isn't your original body. Anyhow, if you're not confident in becoming a celestial king, then what's the purpose of going to so much trouble? This makes sense. Ling Han was delighted upon learning this, and he said, After reaching the 5th severance, I'll also abandon this body to cultivate for several more lifetimes. Impossible! The large black dog immediately refuted. Firstly, your body has been tempered by the indestructible heaven scroll, so it can't be abandoned anyway. Even if your physical body is destroyed and you possess someone else, your Tao will have been severed. At that time, you won't be able to advance any further. You practice a different cultivation technique, and this has determined that you can't follow the same path. Secondly, there's not enough time for you. It's integral that you reach a state of perfection with each mundane that you sever. Even if your severances aren't as comprehensive as that freak's, you can slowly make up for this in the future. In any case, the difference won't be too great. The indestructible heaven scroll is the most powerful physique tempering cultivation technique in the entire world. By practicing it, you won't be weaker than anyone else. Ling Han's heart shuddered. The large black dog even knew about the indestructible heaven scroll. Just what kind of relationship did he have with the owner of the Tower of Three Realms? Who is that freakish prodigy? Where is he now? The large black dog glanced at Ling Han before calmly saying, You've heard of him before. I've even heard of him before. Who is he? The Imperial Void Celestial King, the large black dog said. He paused for a moment before continuing. I'm fairly sure he was already at the 8th heaven back then. Moreover, he was only a single step from reaching the 9th heaven. Right now, it's extremely likely that he's already advanced to the 9th heaven. Gasp! A 9th heaven celestial king. Ling Han recalled what Cheng Fu had told him. Back then, the celestial king of the Chung clan had also been an incredibly freakish being. In the end, however, he had vanished after being defeated by a group of celestial kings. After that, the Imperial Void Celestial King had stepped forward and erased the entire Chung clan. If the Imperial Void Celestial King had truly become a ninth heaven Celestial King, how would Ling Han exact revenge for the Chung clan? Is the Imperial Void Celestial King from the Sealed Emotion Palace? Ling Han was just about to ask a question, yet his mouth was quickly covered by the large black dog's paw. He was stopped from continuing his question. Brat, if you don't want to die, don't casually throw these titles around. Once you mention them, you'll trigger the detection of those old monsters. Regardless of where in the celestial realm you are, their divine sense will still possess the ability to instantly appear before you, the large black dog exclaimed. His spittle sprayed all over Ling Han's face. In fact, Small Tower had also warned him about this before. The titles of some supreme beings couldn't be casually mentioned. Hang on. The Imperial Void Celestial King is already a ninth heaven Celestial King. Yet the large black dog didn't become so worked up when I mentioned his name. Why did he become so worked up when I mentioned the Sealed Emotion Palace? I can only assume that there's an even more powerful individual in the Sealed Emotion Palace. A paramount ruler among the ninth heaven Celestial Kings? Ling Han didn't ask any more questions. Judging by the large black dog's expression, it was as if he wanted to completely seal his mouth. As such, how could he continue to ask about this topic? Small Tower had also mentioned this to him before. If he wanted to know about these matters, he would at least have to become a Celestial King. There were 9 heavens in the Celestial King tier, and advancing to each subsequent level was as difficult as ascending the heavens. The 3 of them ascended the volcano, and the large black dog continued to tell them about the Heavenly Fire Celestial King. In the past, this place had indeed been a powerful sect. However, it was a shame that the Heavenly Fire Celestial King had passed away. The powerful sect disbanded after that, and all of its disciples left. This place then transformed into a burial ground for the Heavenly Fire Celestial King. This was because the Heavenly Fire Celestial King still had a mission. He wanted to refine himself and return to a state of origin so that he could help someone in the future. However, time was an eternal enemy, and the large black dog and the other friends of the Heavenly Fire Celestial King either died or became severely wounded. As time passed, no more powerful elites stood guard at this burial ground. It was also because of this that the Thundercloud Celestial King, Purple River Celestial King, and other Celestial Kings entered here and engaged in an earth-shattering battle to fight for divine metal. However, none of them discovered the secret of the Heavenly Fire Celestial King. More precisely, even after their death, the arrangements of 8th Heaven Celestial Kings weren't something that measly 1st Heaven Celestial Kings could discover and understand. After learning this, Ling Han finally understood the history and origin of this mystery realm. Anyhow, it wasn't long before they reached the peak of the volcano. The large black dog told the Empress to stand in the distance, after which he started to chant at the crater of the volcano. Wang! A veined pattern lit up on the ground, stretching all the way from the crater to the foot of the volcano. A second veined pattern then lit up, followed by a third, a fourth, and all the way until the 108th. Boom! A brilliant radiance soared into the sky, and it was as if the entire volcano was about to fracture and collapse. The volcano shuddered violently. Pung, pung, pung! Countless blood dragon stones were spat out from the volcano at an even quicker rate. This was a truly magnificent sight. Far away in the canyon, everyone was stunned upon seeing this. Such an astonishing phenomenon had never occurred before. Is this because of Ling Han? If it was because of him, that would be far too unfathomable. After all, even Immortal Palace tier elites couldn't enter that region. As a measly 3rd Severance cultivator, how could he trigger such an incredible commotion? However, if it wasn't because of him, this kind of phenomenon had never occurred before, so why would it only occur after Ling Han entered that region? Closer to the volcano, bewitching Maiden Row couldn't help but retreat in disarray. The fire particles among heaven and earth had suddenly become wild and chaotic, so much so that she couldn't withstand them even with her flame control technique. She had no option but to retreat. Fortunately, She had obtained an astonishing number of blood dragon stones. As such, it wouldn't matter even if she were forced to leave the mystery realm now. Boom, boom, boom. The volcano descended into chaos, throwing columns of scorching lava into the air. However, in an eerie sight, these columns of lava didn't fall from the sky. Meanwhile, the 108 veined patterns glowed with an increasing brilliance as they seeped further and further into the ground. The earth trembled, and the volcano surprisingly grew taller and taller. In an unfathomable turn of events, the volcano then started to hover in the air. Ling Han and the Empress yelped in astonishment. This was because the volcano was only a small corner of a rising figure. A colossal figure crawled up from the ground. This was a humanoid figure, and there was a single horn protruding from their forehead. Right now, boiling lava was still flowing from this horn. This was a colossal human who appeared as if they could connect heaven and earth. In fact, just their horn alone could already pierce through the clouds. As such, how tall would they be if they fully stood up? The giant stood up, and he radiated with a domineering might as he peered down at the earth. His aura was surging, and those before him had no option but to prostrate themselves. Eighth Heaven Celestial King. Old friend, we finally meet again, the large black dog said with emotion. It sure was relaxing for you to leave first. You've left all of the troublesome matters to Grandpa Dog. However, who told Grandpa Dog to still be alive? I have to do what I have to do. Rest assured, I'll definitely burn and offer Celestial King Ling Miao's panties to you. Back then we couldn't peep on Celestial Maiden Ling Miao bathing, so I can only offer her panties to you now. That will allow you to finally rest in peace. The large black dog continued to murmur, and it was all about his debauched adventures with the heavenly fire Celestial King. Ling Han couldn't help but grimace as he listened on. He started to suspect that it was because of their incredible debauchery that they had been punished by the heavens. Brat, come here! The large black dog suddenly shouted. Ling Han took a step forward and started to channel his origin power. At the same time, he also displayed his regulations, especially the 9 heavens flame that was burning with vigor. The large black dog started to form hand seals again, controlling the colossal giant in the sky. The colossal giant's chest started to glow. Pooh! A blazing fist-sized rock then flew over from his chest. This was the colossal giant's heart. It had been incredibly large before, yet after being refined by himself, it had now shrunk to the size of an ordinary fist. Show! The blazing heart was as quick as lightning as it flew toward the large black dog. If it had been any other Immortal Palace tier elite, they would have definitely been penetrated by this shooting heart. However, the large black dog had been a celestial king before, so he still possessed some extraordinary abilities even though his cultivation had already fallen. In any case, he clearly knew how to deal with this situation. Freeze! The large black dog shouted as he made a tapping motion with his paw. The blazing heart immediately stopped in midair before slowly hovering above Ling Han's head. Close your eyes and calm your mind. Free yourself of all thoughts and channel the flame control technique. Ling Han sat down and did as he was told. The large black dog made a pointing motion, upon which the blazing heart instantly unleashed rays of light. It was as if it were unleashing a waterfall. The large black dog waved his paw and said, I'll share some of its essence with you and help you advance to the 3rd severance. When this brat finishes defying the heavens and changing his fate, all of the remaining essence will be for you to absorb. A small spark immediately flew out from the blazing heart and floated toward the Empress. This small spark then hovered above the Empress' head before unleashing a waterfall-like wall of flames. The Empress also sat down to absorb the essence. She didn't feel embarrassed at all, because in her eyes, it was only natural that everyone else served her. Did she need to be polite? Boom! It was as if mountains were crumbling and waves were roaring inside Ling Han's body. Each of his cells transformed into a world before being tempered by flames and evolving toward a superior state. Miracles could be nurtured through repetitive tempering. This was analogous to how level 20 godly metal couldn't advance to become genuine divine metal. However, even so, It could be continually tempered and strengthened until it reached the stage of 10-star pseudo-divine metal. It would only be slightly inferior to genuine divine metal. Ling Han was the same. Although his physique wasn't perfect, the flames of this celestial king were helping him cleanse the impurities in his body. Only the purest of essence remained. These flames would then use the essence of the celestial king to nurture and strengthen Ling Han. Otherwise, if he was only tempered and not nurtured, Ling Han would definitely be incinerated into ashes. Even so, he still couldn't help but groan in pain. This process was far too agonizing. This was a heart-wrenching pain that reached the depths of his soul, so it would be useless even if he were knocked unconscious. He would still be able to clearly feel this unbearable pain. This was a fundamental transformation. After all, Ling Han didn't possess a divine fetus. Anyhow, what was a divine fetus? If a clan had a celestial king-tier ancestor, and the regulations of this celestial king materialized upon some descendant, this would give birth to a divine fetus. The owner of this divine fetus would possess an extraordinary power, and they would often be invincible among those at the same cultivation level. Right now, an eighth heaven celestial king had refined his own body and extracted his own essence in order to strengthen Ling Han. Was this not enough to comprehensively elevate the level of Ling Han's foundation? One had to realize that the heavenly fire celestial king had possessed the ability to advance to the ninth heaven. Although he hadn't succeeded, this wasn't a reason to deny his formidable power. Moreover, he had comprehended Tao as the nine heavens flame, and he was a being who had been nurtured by the essence of heaven and earth. As such, just how valuable was this offering? Ling Han's body was developing into a divine fetus. However, there were also huge differences between different divine fetuses. After all, could the remnant regulations of a first heaven celestial king compare to the remnant regulations of an eighth heaven celestial king? Moreover, this was a supremely powerful eighth heaven celestial king. Not only that, but they hadn't held back as they refined their own body. Ling Han forcefully suppressed his pain as he channeled the flame control technique and guided the flames to reconstruct his body. Meanwhile, he also channeled the indestructible heaven scroll to protect his weakened divine sense. Otherwise, he would collapse under these extremely formidable flames. "Old friend, you can finally rest forever," the large black dog said as he removed his laughable blood dragon armor. He had only used this suit of armor to conceal his power. Right now, he naturally didn't need it anymore. Of course, he obviously wouldn't be willing to remove his iron underwear. Otherwise, he would lose his eye-catching demeanor as Grandpa Dog. A smile surprisingly spread across the colossal giant's face. He then nodded before crumbling and falling apart. Pong! He transformed into countless bursts of flames that shot into the surroundings. Under the suppressive power of these flames, all of the chaotic aura in the hidden dragon mystery realm vanished without a trace. First heaven celestial kings were nothing but trash before eighth heaven celestial kings, so the aura that they left behind in this mystery realm was naturally also wiped away with ease. 10 days passed, and the Empress suddenly unleashed a long cry. Under the help of the celestial king-tier power, she had already opened the door to the third severance. She started to undergo heavenly tribulation, and she performed her third severance of heaven and earth amid the vicious arcs of lightning. This enraged heaven and earth, yet the heavenly Tao also had to guard its own regulations. It wasn't long before her heavenly tribulation calmed down and disappeared. Before the Empress could even speak, the large black dog pointed at the spark of flame above her, causing a portion of its power to funnel into her. This forced the Empress to sit down again, accepting the transformation bestowed by the celestial flame. She already possessed a divine fetus, so this transformation naturally wasn't to give her a flaming divine fetus. Instead, it was a transformation to strengthen her divine fetus. The large black dog clasped his paws behind his back, and his expression finally became incredibly solemn for the very first time. Time, it's always time. There's always not enough time. If the storm of darkness surges over, will this brat have enough time to grow and develop? He murmured. Those old monsters aren't driven, and they don't plan to suppress this storm of darkness. Instead, they're always causing trouble and fighting among themselves. I definitely can't allow them to discover the existence of this brat. Otherwise, this plan of hundreds of millions of years will vanish in a puff of smoke. Brat, don't die on me. Even though your path is destined to be filled with extraordinary difficulties and obstacles, and even though you might be forced to walk this path alone and become the enemy of all other beings, you're the only one who's capable of walking to the end. Because you're the only hope left behind by the heavenly venerate. Ling Han couldn't hear the large black dog's murmurings. Right now, he was completely focused on battling against the power of the flames and guiding them through his body. He was maximizing the benefit of these flames, and this process of tempering and transformation was an extremely slow and gradual one. After all, it had taken Gu Daoi 10 lifetimes to finally develop his divine fetus. Although Ling Han had the help of a mighty celestial king, this still wasn't something that could be completed in an instance. 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. After almost 10 years, the blazing heart finally started to dim. It dimmed at an incredible rate, and after 3 days, the blazing heart completely lost its radiance. A gust of wind blew over, causing the heart to disintegrate into ashes. The last remaining remnant of the heavenly fire celestial king vanished into thin air. Just like how he had been nurtured by the essence of heaven and earth, he was now returning to the embrace of heaven and earth. Ling Han and the Empress opened their eyes in unison. They then stood up together. Peak stage of the third severance. Even though the essence of the celestial king had mainly been used to temper and reconstruct their respective physique, just a wisp of this essence had been enough to raise their cultivation by an astonishing amount. They were easily raised to the peak stage of the third severance. However, the celestial king tier power wasn't enough to help them perform the fourth severance. This was something that they had to comprehend by themselves. It was also because of this that the large black dog first helped the Empress advance to the third severance. Otherwise, the extra essence of the celestial king would have been wasted. Brat, you'll have to fend for yourself in the future. Also, remember to cause more trouble. Otherwise, I'll be ashamed to be associated with you. The large black dog waved his paw and continued, All right, my task here is already complete, so it's time for me to fulfill my dream of many years. He spread his 4 legs and instantly vanished into the distance.